Either that was.
Okay, great. Right.
Um,
Wait,
So, yeah.
right, Director Rose Marino is going to introduce our next segment.
Yes, I'm very excited, Director Nicole Rosmarino for the record, to introduce the subject of the State Wildlife Action Plan. We have Casey Miller from Colorado Parks and Wildlife with us, along with Lindsay Brandt, our Biodiversity Program Manager. I think I saw Dave Clute in the room. Hey, Dave. As we've been doing for the past few months, it's really important that we hear directly from our sister agencies, especially on projects and programs that intersect with our work. In this case, I can't think of a better example than the SWAP intersecting with Lindsay's work every day on biodiversity. So with that, we'd love to turn it over to both of you.
Great. Thank you, Director Rose Marino. And yeah, Lindsay Brandt, Biodiversity Program Coordinator. Director Rose Marino kind of covered the introductions, but yeah, I do just want to also welcome Dave Clute, who is the Deputy Assistant Director, Terrestrial Branch Species Conservation Team, and also maybe wins the prize for the longest title I've ever had to say. But this presentation actually originated from a request from Commissioner Heath back in September when Casey presented to the Natural Areas Program, which Commissioner Heath sits on that council as well. And it's really just taken us until now to have room in the agenda to bring this presentation to you. And I'm really going to leave the rest of it up to Casey to brief you on the SWAP, what it is, and then I'll make a few comments at the end, kind of as Director Rose Marino mentioned, kind of how it affects our work, or really supplements our work, I should say. But yeah, I'll just hand it off to Casey.
Great. Well, thank you, Lindsay, and thank you all for having us here today. We're super excited to share the newly approved by the Fish and Wildlife Service 2025 State Wildlife Action Plan. So the timing is great that we didn't come till now, because we can say that the plan has been just approved this month by the Fish and Wildlife Service. So we're pretty excited about that. And I'm happy to share our work with you. All right, there we go. So if you aren't familiar with the State and Tribal Wildlife Grants Program, it began over 25 years ago to start funding a broad array of fish and wildlife. It does require congressional appropriations annually to fund the program, and then the grants that come to each state and territory are based on the state size and population. And then to be eligible for those funds, you need to update your SWAP every 10 years. But in Colorado, we use the SWAP for a much larger purpose. It really guides a lot of our work through species conservation and native species conservation. And so we are fortunate here to have other funding sources like GOCO and SCTF funds to support this work. So just a quick history, what's happened in Colorado with SWAPs is mirrors what's happened across the country. We had our first plan in 2005, and it really, was done to meet the requirements to begin this funding and start the awareness about these plans. It was a little more internally focused at that time. And then in 2015, you may recognize the cover. We had our next revision of the SWAP, and it was a more thoughtful development process. It increased the awareness and kind of started having more stakeholder engagement and outward focus, and a little more influence on what we did within our own agency. But it was an 850-page PDF, so a little hard to navigate, and just started, thinking about how are we going to make things more accessible. And so now in 2025, we just finished our latest revision, and it is more accessible and more actionable. And we're really excited to have completed our first digital SWAP. So it's a collection of digital resources that I'm going to show you today. It makes it really easy for folks to access the information and manipulate it in ways that they want to be able to use the data. And it's also something that we've really worked hard on reducing the awareness of the SWAP and transparency in the process over the last 2 years. We really worked to engage a lot more people in the SWAP and thinking about priorities within CPW and with our partners. And so we've spent the last 2 years planning, being in technical development with our experts, but it's really just the beginning. We have 10 years to implement this plan, and this is what we're excited about now. So we did make sure we identified our species of greatest conservation need in their habitats. We named the threats that they're facing. We listed existing plans, monitoring, and other actions that are already happening. And then we provided prospective short and long-term actions that we can all take in the coming years. And now we're turning over to the implementation side where we want to continue to raise awareness, involve more people, build community by sharing stories, tools, and results that support everyone's work in this field. And so a couple notes, oops. Off that, sorry.
Yes.
I don't need a pencil, I don't think. But let's click it again.
Skip. There you go.
Thank you.
Find the meeting controls again.
Thanks, Nick. Sorry about that. Maybe I should just use the keyboard.
You click over there.
But you're just
No,
clicking around.
nope, just up in the upper right.
Oh,
where the-
there we go. Okay, sorry about that. So a quick note on the species of greatest conservation need. This is the suite of species that the SWAP addresses. There's no regulatory authority for this species list, and it's not an endangered species list. It's also not all of our priorities or all of our partners' priorities. And then the way each state defines that list is up to the state itself. So you have to define how you came up with your list and how you developed it, but how you do that is up to you. And so in Colorado, we define SGCN as species with concerns related to either abundance, like the low number of black-footed ferrets, distribution, like a shrinking range for the Colorado pike minnow, or trend, like the alarming declining trends we're seeing with American kestrels. We also have a new subset of species of greatest information need. So these are species we are concerned about. They are considered SGCN, but we don't have enough information to know exactly what's going on with them. So we need to identify the data gaps, how we can close those gaps, and when will a species be ready to move from data deficient to conservation ready? What is enough information to say, okay, we know what's happening, we know what's going on with this species. So for the 2025 SWAP, there's 612 SGCN. This does include vertebrates and invertebrates. And there's 43 habitat categories. So everything now is on the CPW website. This QR code takes you there. I'll show it again at the end, but you can just go to our website and it's highlighted for now under conservation and get to all of the resources that I'm going to show you. The first is our species ranking dashboard. And this is where you can go and look at how did we come up with the SGCN list, the criteria we used, how each species was ranked, and where they landed in the process. And so when you go into it, it's very interactive. So you can click on anything and it starts to manipulate the data and show you what you're most interested in. From this view, it's all plants, invertebrates, and vertebrates. And you can see that we assessed over 1,400 species to get down to that 612. And we felt like with that transparency and process piece, we really wanted people to see all of the species that were assessed. So if you want to know, well, how come this isn't on the list? You could go in and see, oh, because maybe it isn't doing as bad as I thought, or maybe this is not exactly what I was expecting. So you can see all of the species that we assessed, which we're pretty excited about. But like I said, you can click on things. So in this case, the highlighted part is all of the birds that are tier 1. So there's 18 species, and that opens up a table below, a big long table. And you can scroll across that and see how our experts answered all the different criteria questions in their ranking meetings to determine that those birds belong in tier 1. So there's a lot of data in there that you can look through. And everything is downloadable. You can export it to Excel. So if you don't have good internet connectivity where you are, or you just prefer to have it on your own computer, on your desktop, you can download everything into Excel as well. And then we have our species of greatest conservation need and habitats data hub. This is the core content of the SWAP. So all tier 1 and tier 2 plants and vertebrates are in here. We're working on adding the invertebrates as well. And within the data hub now, you can explore species, habitats, and threats and actions more. So in this example, you're seeing the species summary tab for the boreal toad. You can see a picture, you can see the range map, you can see which habitats the species is found in. And then over on the habitat summary page, this is for pinyon juniper. You can see the distribution map in a picture, and then which species are found in that habitat. So you can be thinking multi-species planning by habitat type and use it however you need. And then on the threats tab, these are direct threats. And when we say threats, there is some required language with the SWAP. So we're talking about stressors, but we're really intentional about timing, intensity, where in the state, what species, because we know some things may be a threat to one species may actually help another species. So you have to kind of get into the details to really understand when we're talking about threats. So there's visual charts. This is for the orange spotted sunfish, or you can click over to the table that gives you some more threat detail. And then we did some climate change assessments for species and habitats. And for the species, we used a NatureServe tool called the Climate Change Vulnerability Index, the CCVI. This was a pretty data intensive, robust exercise. Our species experts spent about 2 to 4 hours per species doing the CCVIs. So that wheel on the right side of the screen there, that's our adaptive capacity wheel. And just each spoke of the wheel is a question they answered about the species' natural history, life history information to determine how much capacity does the species have to adapt to climate change. And then that's modeled with the species known range and climate exposure expectations for the for different emission scenarios to come up with those kind of speedometer looking things that tell you how vulnerable a species might be to climate change in the coming years. And then we have notes as well. There's a lot of information in these tabs you can click out to find more details on all the questions that were asked, how the modeling works, the results for all the species, so you can compare which ones of all of the SGCN are most vulnerable or not. And so there's a ton of information in this section if you're interested. And then on the actions and monitoring tab, and this you can find for both habitats and species, we wanted to capture everything that we know is already happening because it's not just the swap, right? Lots of people have put a lot of time into monitoring species, writing management plans, recovery plans, and we wanted to capture all of that. So the bottom half of the screen is existing monitoring and actions, as well as any recovery and management plans that are already out there. So for this clay-loving wild buckwheat example, there is a recovery plan and hyperlinks out to that, so you can get to what you need to know. And then the top part is our prospective short and long-term actions you can toggle between. So short-term being in the next few years, where do we think we should begin doing things? And long-term is kind of the lifetime of the swap. And then there's other places within that data hub where you can look at threats and actions themselves. So if you're more interested in which species are affected by this threat, or which species should we take this action for, or habitats, you can come at it that way too. If you don't want to go to species route, you can go to threats or actions route. And there is a video. So if this is something that you or anyone who's listening will be using a lot, there's a really great instructional video for how to navigate the whole. So this is a screenshot from just the bottom of our website. Within the web page, all of these tools are embedded, so you can just go right in there and interface with all the dashboards and everything right from our website. There is a document, this planning process and major findings. It outlines the criteria, all the process that we took, the stakeholder engagement results, our threats assessment findings, actions, and those kinds of things. So you can go and read that information as well. There's a story map that shows some of our successes since our last swap, as well as the changes that we've made for this swap. That video is linked there. You can also download everything from the data hub into Excel as well. And then we link out to Codex, which is housed by the Natural Heritage Program. This is the range for the round-tailed horned lizard. And you can click all the boxes you want and see different species or habitats. This is the first time we've had these spatial tools available for the swap, where you can go in and see all of the different species and where they're found. The other thing is, if you aren't familiar with Codex, you can draw a polygon over a parcel, over one of your properties, over something that maybe our land use specialists are going to be using this to look at if they're writing a comment letter on a proposed development. And it prints out or gives you back a PDF report of anything that could or is found in that polygon. And so we see this as really useful for folks to get some spatial information. The report that you get back doesn't just show you swap, but it does now include swap species where it didn't used to. And so you can see the top part for the polygon I drew is known occurrences. So this twin pod was definitely found in that polygon, or potential occurrences like grasshopper sparrows have been known in this area. So it may be found in your area, and it just helps with planning. We also have a number of actions and things in that document that are things that we know we need to do to continue to move the swap forward and with swap implementation that aren't species or habitat specific. So we want to develop some implementation tracking. We're finishing our work on invertebrates. We're doing some communications planning, some climate adaptation workshops, and some other things that will be coming in the next few years. So just a quick example before I wrap up of things that how you can use all this data to maybe tell a story or think about what action might I need to take for a species or a habitat. So to tell the story, what better species than our state bird, the lark bunting, which is found on the eastern grasslands, where I know you all have a lot of interest as well. And it is a species we're keeping an eye on because of declining trend and its reliance on those grasslands. There's negative population trends for all data sources for lark buntings, and they're in steep decline for eBird and breeding bird survey data. They are nomadic, so they don't breed in the exact same place every year, but 17% of the global population of lark buntings do breed in Colorado somewhere every year. And 44% of the global population breeds somewhere in the shortgrass prairie region. And so we have a shared responsibility, as you can see on their range map, with other states and in Mexico to take care of this species. A significant number of them do show up here. And some of the threats that they're facing are loss of CRP lands, worsening drought, conversion to native grasslands, cheatgrass impacting their nesting, as well as more severe spring storms when there's hail while they're trying to nest, pesticides influencing insects. And so, like I said, they can move based on the annual conditions, but with changing land use patterns, it's getting harder and harder maybe for them to find suitable breeding locations. So what are we to do? How does this help us understand what we need to do? Well, we know we want to keep monitoring. The Integrated Monitoring of Bird Conservation Regions program is led by the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies, and CPW in Colorado have been a partner in that program since its inception. And in the last 10 years since the last swap, we have a lot more data, really robust trend data that we use to assess most of our bird species for the swap. So we need to keep learning about what's going on. We also want to keep working lands working, so voluntary actions like native plants and stock tank ladders, and then support efforts for planting across the species range and its habitat, like the Central Grasslands Roadmap, our own habitat plan that just recently came out, or the Southern Wings program that supports birds across their entire annual life cycle. So this is just some of the ways that you can dig into that data, find out a bunch of information, and kind of say, where can I kind of tie in with the work that we do? That's all I had for you today, but I'm more than happy to answer questions. I think Lindsay has a few more things to say too.
Yeah, thank you so much, Casey. Fantastic summary. And yeah, I'll just add, from the stewardship team perspective, the previous swap, while it was helpful to kind of support our work, and we could kind of go in there and, identify what species were priority species of greatest conservation needs, that the sort of actions and threats were, pretty vague, I would say. And so it was like, okay, we know this species is threatened by habitat loss. Great. So with this new swap, we just have a much greater opportunity to really dive in, use that information, figure out some of our priorities, like with this information, which of these species occur on state trust lands, where are these big areas of overlap, how do we focus our efforts to really kind of leverage the information that's already there and have a significant impact and kind of get the most bang for our buck on supporting some of these species. So that's kind of our approach that we're going to be taking with the swap. As Casey mentioned, it's all available on Codex now, and we can also download it into our internal GIS system. So when we're evaluating potential projects, when we're looking for a new stewardship trust property, when we're looking for sites to do potential stewardship projects, we have the ability to take all that information and see how it does intersect the state trust lands and where we might want to be focusing. And then also, I think I kind of covered everything, where can we do projects? Where can we, engage? And so it's going to be a great tool for us just to continue that work in kind of a more hands-on way, I would say.
That was
definitely
super impressive.
Yeah, very, very,
Very, can you just walk us through like one of the endangered or what the most endangered species are, like within the invertebrates, et cetera? That was very impactful for me when I saw your presentation earlier.
Well, and for invertebrates, I might see if Dave has anything to chime in. I mean, there are some bumblebees that are in some pollinator species. Our tier 1 species are not the most endangered, but the most that we're the most concerned about, right? And so that includes things like lesser prairie chicken, mountain plover.
And the horned owl.
Yeah.
Right.
And sorry?
And also owls.
There are some owls. We have some owls in our species of greatest information need list, that subset, because we realize we really need to learn a lot more about what's going on with some of our forest birds and some of the owls.
And included as an appendix or an exhibit to your cover sheet, we did include a list of all the species and what their tier 1 or tier 2 status is. But then it's also available probably in a much more accessible format on the website.
Not to restate the obvious, but I'm imagining that the flow, again, there's more information about threats and the extent, which then leads into us having better informed, more accurate stipulations for any of our leases, right? So it just continues to up the game in terms of how shaping how people can use our land.
Yeah, and right now, as you know, our process when we have, a development proposal is to send that proposal over to the CPW land use team
Mhm.
for them to comment on, and that, and then those comments come back and we
Right.
implement those. But having the swap, because sometimes depending on, the day or the year or whatever, those comments kind of come at us in a variety of ways. So having our internal staff have the ability to kind of preview some of that is
Right.
also a big help, that we can sort of be like, I expect that this is what we're going to hear back. And working with the land use team has been a great partnership, but it's also nice for us just to be able, because sometimes our staff will be like, do we even take this project any further? Is it worth sending it to
Right.
CPW? And we can look at it and just be like, yeah, we think it's okay, or maybe it's not a good idea or whatever. So it definitely helps us with that process as well.
Commissioner Pruitt?
Madam Chair, I've got a couple of questions, but I think one's more for our staff. But first of all, Casey, congratulations and the entire team. It's a long and complex and incredible accomplishment. And I say that having, I think 10 years ago, I voted on the previous version when I was on the commission. So I think my question for you and your team is refresh my memory on and inform the room the sources of funding, and broadly speaking, are those sources of funding growing or diminishing for the protection of all the species on the swap list? I mean, unfortunately, the swap list is growing. We're globally, we're entering the sixth extinction, and we, despite great efforts on sage grouse, Gunnison sage grouse, and prairie chicken, the populations are going down, not up. I just say that, I think we all know that generically, but talk a little bit about how much investment Colorado puts into the conservation of threatened and endangered species. And then I've got another question that's more directed toward our staff.
Okay, I may let Dave answer the.
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to answer that. Once again, I'm Dave Clute. I'm the Deputy Assistant Director for Species Conservation with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Yeah, thanks for that question. We, within the agency, we rely on a whole variety of funding sources, and directly related to the State Wildlife Action Plan is the State Wildlife Grant Program. And that's funding we get annually from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and it's allocated, based on a formula related to geographic area and population size for each of the states. And so those are funds that we get directly from Fish and Wildlife Service. There are other opportunities related to that. There's a competitive State Wildlife Grant Program that we sometimes partner with other states to do collaborative projects, as Casey highlighted many of the species we're concerned about have multi-state or even multinational distribution. So we need to work across their entire range in many situations. We also rely a lot on GOCO, Great Outdoors Colorado funding. They're a significant partner, and they fund a very significant amount of the work we do within CPW for State Wildlife Action Plan implementation and other programs. We also rely on some other funding like Species Conservation Trust Fund, which is derived from fees levied on oil and gas development, and that goes into
and that varies with the revenue from severance taxes. Is that correct?
It does, yes. It's related to severance tax. It is variable. It's been a little more consistent over the past few years. We get about $2.5 million annually into CPW to fund a lot of our research programs are funded by that fund. So those are some of the big sources we use. Of course, there's other sources we use and things that are more tangentially related to some of these issues that we're concerned about. A lot of the work we're doing on habitat conservation through our habitat conservation and connectivity plan. working with our land use and energy coordinators and the comments we're making, to influence development, working with county commissioners and all sorts of other entities that are influencing the landscape. So, we can have impact in a whole lot of different ways, and then partnering with groups like State Land Board. And you guys certainly have a significant land base that is very impactful to a lot of the species that we're concerned about. So certainly it isn't all work that we're doing by ourselves within CPW. Some of it is. We work a lot with federal partners, of course, in state or national forests and Bureau of Land Management properties, also partnering with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on a lot of the regulatory and Endangered Species Act issues that they're involved with. So again, we can come at this from multiple different angles. And I think that's one of the strengths of the SWAP is that, with the tools that Casey presented, you can look at this from lots of different angles. Are you coming at this from a habitat approach? Are you interested in a very narrow species specific approach? Are you interested in climate? Are you interested in short-term or long-term action? So there's lots of different ways you can approach this, depending on what your interest is, maybe what the charge of your organization is, what resources you have to affect all of these different things that we have concerns about.
Right, thank you. All right, so then the next question is more toward our team. So it would be broadly this: to what extent can we regulate, embed regulation in our leasing process for our surface acres, or for that matter, mineral right acreage, with the intent of enhancing a threatened or endangered species? What are the limitations? I assume there may be perhaps are there any statutory or policy limitations, or are they solely political or social considerations? What is the extent of our authority to protect species and habitat in behalf of those species?
Please.
I'd like to take a stab and then certainly encourage Nancy to articulate further. One very specific way that we protect species is through lease stipulations designed for that species. For example, we have a Barong owl one, we have a plover one. These are species that show up on the SWAP list. And so this information will certainly inform and cause us to update those stipulations, working very closely with CPW. So that's a very specific way. I think more broadly, our ecosystem services program, with which you're familiar, you visited the Prebles Meadow Jumping Mouse Mitigation Bank in Larimer County, it can very much utilize the SWAP to inform new opportunities. We'll be bringing the Lesser Prairie Chicken to you in the spring for a revision of that stewardship action plan. The SWAP has informed the updates to that plan. And as we look at possible mitigation banking opportunities for that species, which it's tier 1, right? Species that got greatest conservation needs tier 1. So those are, I think a specific application through the lease stipulations, broader application through ecosystem services. Also within the stewardship trust, properties can be designated, for example, for outstanding rare plant values. So those are some examples if it's helpful, but I'd love for Lindsay, if you want to add to that, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And Director Rosmarino pretty much touched on what I was going to say, but just to reiterate, for every kind of proposed use that comes through here, our staff writes specific lease stipulations based on what we can determine during the desktop review that we know might occur on that property. So if we know there's, burrowing owl habitat, we will add that stipulation. If we know there's a sage grouse lek, we would put stipulations on saying, you can't be doing anything in the area during this time period. So those go into the actual lease contract. So the lessee is then contractually obligated to follow those. And if they don't, they risk being in violation and potentially losing their lease.
To that point, do we have adequate staffing to monitor compliance with stipulations like that? I mean, a lot of these properties are pretty remote and
That's a great question. We did conduct an audit of that. And, to be fair, again, it was a desktop audit. We didn't go out and check on the ground whether these things are happening, but we audited how many of the stipulations actually made their way into the lease, and we had, pretty good coverage there. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but we don't at this time, with the exception of maybe our oil and gas, have staff going out and checking all of these things, but our lessees are required to notify us, hey, we're starting construction, we're starting, whatever the operation is. And so we could be flagging if they're, saying, hey, we're starting this. And we're like, it's the middle of letting season. Like, no, you're not starting this. So, yeah, it's certainly something we could have more energy dedicated to, but, I think we're doing pretty good with the staff that we have. So,
Nicole, I think you mentioned Beaver. The agency CPW has circulated a beaver management plan is it still under comment period?
No, it was presented to our commission last week.
Okay, it did. Okay. Did we comment on that? And can we stipulate, for instance, in a lease where there's a significant beaver population, management protection of that beaver population?
So Commissioner Pribble, we did comment on that plan, very supportive of the direction that the CPW is going with beaver management. I think we're going to be looking at, a set of species to develop new stipulations around. We'll certainly keep beaver in mind, given how important they are ecologically. I also want to mention that later in this workshop, you'll be hearing about the lens monitoring tool from Mindy. And that is really aimed at real-time monitoring and subsequent lease enforcement action if necessary when we see a compliance issue. So I also want to turn it over to Assistant Director Smith to talk a little more about stipulations and enforcement.
Sure, yeah. Thank you, and thanks for the question. To answer your very first question, I don't believe we have any, I think it's up to us to the extent of what stipulations we want. I don't think there's any legal prohibitions against putting stipulations in our lease. And we do put them for oil and gas. There are at least one stipulation in every single lease, and our stewardship team does a very good job of detailing more stipulations in those leases. Most of them have more than one. It's the same case with renewable energy, and I believe all of our leases. So that's how we're managing it now. I know that you guys do stewardship action plans for larger regions that we work within, and some of that stuff is in policy. So.
we'll come to that tomorrow when we talk about the Fen Stewardship Action Plan and how for a specific species or resource, we sort of have more broad policies of, little p policy perhaps of, on any property that contains this resource, we have specific guidelines that we follow and would write into a lease were there a lease issued.
Well, I just want to encourage staff and colleagues here. That I, for one, would encourage the most aggressive posture we can take in policy on species conservation, pure and simple.
And one point I do want to make is the stipulations that we craft, they're property specific. So, we're looking at each proposal kind of individually and looking at that property and how it fits into the bigger picture. So, your example of beavers, that might be very important on one property where there's a big wetland and the beavers are really affecting that hydrology and everything. Whereas another property, there's a beaver in somebody's irrigation ditch, that might be a different conversation. So we really do try to look at it property by property so we understand that whole picture.
Thank you.
So we don't do a lot of land acquisition, but in your judgment, in what areas do you find that more land could be valuable in terms of conservation and preservation of species?
Gosh, that's a tough one. Thank you for that question. You know, I guess I'd like to say everywhere. We look at Colorado. There's lots of us here
Right,
now.
that's from the
So,
record.
certainly habitats are changing. You know, I guess we could look at some of our most imperiled, our highest priority habitats, you know, sagebrush, shortgrass prairie, wetlands, of course, are places that harbor a lot of species of greatest conservation need. That might otherwise not be protected. You know, there's lots of federal lands that contain many of our forests that have some level of protection. So there are a variety of tools out there through, you know, some of them are housed on Codex through the Natural Heritage Program and other places looking at, you know, relative risk, you know, risk of conversion, things like that. There's maybe tools we could look at. I wouldn't say there's one place that I would point out more than any other, but, you know, depending on opportunities that present themselves, there may be some tools out there that we can look to for guidance as to where those investments might be best placed.
I have a question that was triggered by your comment about getting, well, one, that this is just now done, and we had a meeting with the county commissioners this morning, a roundtable virtually, and we try to meet with county commissioners in areas when we go on field trips. And my question to you about this is, they promulgate land use plans and regulations, and so are they all like in touch with this, or do you have to do an outreach tour to the various commissioners and counties out there to help them know this tool is available as they formulate those plans?
It's a good idea. We did get some comment letters from county commissioners that wrote in during the public comment periods. So they came together as a board, you know, and wrote comment letters and sent them in. We've also worked a lot with the county open space staff. So like what's going on within Jefferson County, what data are they collecting? Boulder County, they want to be contributing towards the body of knowledge based on what they're doing in their open spaces. So we did hear from some commissioners, there could be more work to do. That the document that I said where we have actions not related to a specific species or habitat, we do have in there some supporting local land use regulations, local we have our person who's working on all of the wildlife crossings, you know, and she's seeing from her lens, this is only so successful if the land coming into where the crossing is going to be is protected. So she provided some resources to be thinking about that from a more local level for sure.
So I was thinking too about some of the more remote counties, which we heard from this morning, of just not knowing this is an incredible resource, particularly in its next iteration with all the tools that would aid and abet planning efforts or revising the planning efforts. And we fight that, you know, how do you make sure that the commissioners are aware of what we're doing and we're aware of what they're doing. So anyway, it just seemed like this would be something that may not rise to Delta counties. They might not be thinking about it. And yet it would be a heck of a resource on the front end for developing these plans.
Yeah, that's an ongoing challenge, and Casey's working on developing a communication plan that touches, you know, many different audiences, and county commissioners certainly could be one of those. And that was part of the motivation behind designing the plan the way we did this time, knowing that last time an 850-page PDF document is not terribly useful to physically flip through. So, you know, a resource where you can really drill down and look at your specific geographic area of interest is much more effective, I think.
Well, thank you very much. What a comprehensive presentation.
Geothermal.
Oh, that's the geothermal, and then we'll, following the geothermal presentation or update from Crystal, we'll then have a quick break to grab some lunch.
Okay. All right, we have our minerals director, Crystal Caranda, and Ben, are you gonna join?
I mean, sure.
Our solid minerals manager, Ben Teschner, will be giving us an update on the geothermal request for information, which we closed in December, and we'll be describing our next steps.
We've been joking this morning that Ben can provide you with the rock talk. Any questions that you have?
Here for the rock talk. Get a pin that says that.
So I'm here today to discuss the results from the geothermal request for information and give an update on the next steps. And then at the end, I will open the floor if there are any questions that the board has. the picture that you see before you is a geothermal exploration project that was happening in Nevada. This is the drilling rig that's on site. So as you can see, it's the same drilling rig that they use for oil and gas. And it's the same surface disturbance that you would see in an oil and gas development. And this is for exploration for geothermal. I'm clicking. No, there we go. I think what we discovered in the request for information is that there is a strong interest in developing geothermal on state land road properties. Some housekeeping items before I dive into this. This presentation is not going to be inclusive of the Maxwell Park or the Mount Princeton parcel. That parcel is currently subject to ongoing litigation, so any strategies that we discuss moving forward are not going to include the Maxwell Park property. Second, I have purposely left this presentation high level, so I have not identified the names of any operators that submitted RFIs or the exact location of where they submitted inquiries for land, just due to keep the integrity of the bid process and to keep some confidentiality. So I wanted to make that clear. It was intentionally left that way. This is a timeline of how we got to where we are today. So back in August of 2025, the board directed staff to issue a request for information and see if there's any interest in doing geothermal on state trust lands. We decided to work with Efficient Markets to issue that RFI, mainly because they have done requests for information and done RFPs for geothermal for other state agencies and for the BLM. And we also have a contract with them for oil and gas. So they issued that in September. The RFI closed in December of last year. And then staff internally met with some of the staff at Efficient Markets just to debrief and get their thoughts. And I think we really thought that the breadth was a lot bigger than is typical for this industry. The amount of responses that we received and then the breadth of it being all across the state was a lot more diverse than we were anticipating. So that was great. Staff also decided to meet with some operators to get some more clarity. Some of the operators nominated a lot of lands. And so we wanted to try to narrow down and ask some follow-up questions. So we didn't meet with everyone, but we met with a few operators to get some more information. And then we are here today at the workshop. So as a reminder, the questions that we went through in our RFI: what type of land are you interested in? What type of project? What's your timeline? Do you have experience? How can we assist you to getting this project to fruition? And what do you think is a reasonable rent and royalty payment? So overall, we received 11 responses from 10 different operators, which I think is great and a lot higher than what we were anticipating. So in regard to what land, we received over 576,000 acres of interest. And those acres were in every single district across the state. So I think that was surprising that there were so many projects located in many different regions throughout the state. I would like to highlight, though, that after we had some of these follow-up conversations, we found that they may not be wanting to do projects on all of the land that they nominated. They sometimes try to keep the land they want confidential, so they'll nominate things around it. We've seen that in oil and gas when we have huge nominations and then only a few sell at auction. We find it's because they are trying to keep what they really want confidential. And so next, what type of project? I will go through this, and then if you have technical questions, Ben can jump in as well. Okay, so for the most part, all of our inquiries wanted to use geothermal to generate electricity. So we had a couple that talked about doing direct use. That's where you use the geothermal resource to directly heat a home or a pool, something of that nature. But that was more of a side component. They almost all exclusively wanted to generate electricity. So these are the three main ways that you can generate electricity. Here on the left, my left side, is the traditional conventional hydrothermal. This is where there's an underground heated reservoir and there's permeability in the rock. And these fractures allow the heat to come and then naturally heat that reservoir. And you can see if there's enough permeability in the rocks, it can seep up to the surface. That's where you'd see natural hot springs or geysers. So in this situation, they would take a wellbore into that heated reservoir. They would have another wellbore that would pull the water up. It converts to steam, which runs a turbine at the surface and goes into a generator and generates electricity. The water or the steam is then cooled and injected back into the reservoir. So we had some nominations that wanted to do these sorts of projects that were near naturally occurring resources that the State Land Board is near. We had some nominations that were interested in doing enhanced geothermal system. This is where they find a hot rock and they drill down to the hot rock, and then they use fracking technology, the same that they would use for oil and gas, and they fracture the rock, and then they inject a fluid or typically water into that rock formation and let it heat up. And what they're in effect doing is exactly what we talked about on the first. They're creating a reservoir that doesn't exist. So they're using hot, dry rock and injecting the water to create that underground heated reservoir. And then they would pull up the water. And it's the same process at the top with a turbine and a generator to create electricity. And then the third system is a closed loop advanced geothermal system. These are newer technologies that are coming out where it's an entirely closed loop system where they identify hot rock and they put a pipeline, and the pipeline will go lateral through the hot rock. And the thought is that if they inject a fluid into the pipe and it runs through the rock will heat up the liquid and then again pull it to the surface to run a turbine and go through a generator and generate electricity. So some information, just side notes on these. In comparison, the advanced geothermal system and the enhanced geothermal system, these are 3 to 5 times more expensive. And this is just a rough estimate from what we've gathered from talking to operators, from doing research. But it is a lot more expensive because they typically have to go a lot deeper than you would for a traditional source.
I have a quick
Oh, yeah.
question. So next generation, can they do that anywhere, or is it still site specific to where this hot rock is?
Site specific to hot rock.
Okay.
But you don't have to have the water source available,
Mhm.
so it opens up a lot
Yeah,
more.
important qualifier on all these is they are all site specific, right? And there may be some overlap between what could happen in different place. In one place, you may be able to do a couple of different things. And also that these look like discrete individual projects, but in reality, there's a lot of kind of merging of these ideas and how you can kind of put things together in the ways like Legos to make one project work for a specific spot.
But it does mean that there are more, if you were limited just to the existing reservoir, that limits the opportunity set. And as you just then look for hot rock that's not too impossibly deep, it widens open the
Yes.
range.
This has opened up a lot more opportunity for geothermal than what previously existed.
And how much is their consideration proximity to, transmission lines, and is that an overlay for later?
Yeah.
Or is that what
It
they're
is.
taking?
That's very
into-
much an overlay for right now.
That's what, okay, so as they're examining it and nominating in this.
Yeah, I've been using the term nominating, but I guess it's requesting information, so.
And is it safe to say the reason it's more expensive is because they're going deeper to find those hot rock areas?
Yeah.
Is that-
And I think, some of the depths they're testing right now here in Colorado are like 20,000 feet. Oxy just currently has a test well that went to 20,000 feet, and most oil and gas is below 10. So these are a lot deeper than what's traditionally being drilled. And then on that same front, though, these wells can produce 5 to 10 times more megawatts, or that's what they're expected to produce. Obviously, when they run the test and bring the water up, if it's not as hot as they were hoping, it's not going to produce as many megawatts. But in theory, they do produce more.
And even for the deeper ones, can they repurpose, old oil and gas.
Maybe.
Yeah, I was like, that is TBD. I think it depends on the type of well that was originally drilled, how the integrity of the pipe. Because this is a lot hotter, a lot deeper. They're having to go deeper. The casing, there's a lot of factors that would go into whether it could be repurposed,
And
but
it's
they are
a
looking
spot.
into that.
And I mean, another cost here is that you're doing a lot more downhole, and downhole construction and wellbore construction is a lot more complicated on these right two than it is on the left one.
And then another concern that sometimes comes up with the EGS specifically is water usage. So since there isn't a naturally occurring underground reservoir, they're having to get water to inject it. However, they are able to use degraded water. So they don't have to use fresh water. They can use brackish water, wastewater. So it's not competing with the traditional drinking water sources. It's not competing for agriculture, what we would drink. This is using water that's in underground reservoirs that currently can't be used for any other source. So project timeline, pretty much everyone that responded is not, depending on if they started exploration now, got permits, they're looking at production after 2030. So this is far out, and that's, so it takes years to get the permitting, to get the test wells, and then get that into production. So I think, depending on how fast we can issue a lease, this is going to be a long-term project. And experience, we know that there's no geothermal production in Colorado right now, but there is exploration. So we didn't have any companies that are currently doing exploration in Colorado, but it was all across the board experience-wise. There are some doing projects in other states internationally that are in production. Some have gone through permitting and exploration phases. And what we saw all across the board is all of these companies have extensive oil and gas background. A lot of them had people, 30 years at Chevron and the drilling team. And so they're very familiar with the drilling and fracking technology needed for these projects. The theme of how can we assist you, I think, was overarching, don't price your things too high. So this is a new market where we're just getting off the ground. If you price things too high, it's never going to go anywhere. So we heard that a lot. And on that same vein, what is a reasonable rent and royalty? Majority of people asked us to use the BLM rent and royalty structure, saying it was reliable. They could get financing with that. So we saw that time and again. So the next steps, I think because of the overwhelming response, we would like to do a competitive bid strategy through requests for proposals. We have thought of doing 2 rounds of RFPs this next year. The first round, we have identified a lot of smaller parcels, a lot of individual 640 sections, 640 acre sections were nominated. So we're looking at trying to lease a lot of those in this first round. And then Ben and I also identified a couple of tracks that were maybe 3 or 4 sections. So not very big, but we wanted to have something to compare to that had some interest. And then in the second round, we would look to focus on more larger parcels or areas, maybe in a county, if we had multiple things in a region, we would look to lease all of those together. But we want more time to evaluate those larger parcels and figure out the best strategy for how to lease those. But we feel confident with the smaller parcels for round 1.
And learn from our round 1.
Yeah. So the timeline, starting with today on this timeline, what this would look like. We would have our first RFP offering. We're hoping in this first quarter. These dates I put on here as goals. They're not to be exact or specific. But after the RFP, I have stars here when the board would come in, because we would bring the recommendation to the board, and the board would ultimately vote on who receives this geothermal lease and who staff would negotiate a lease with. So then that would be sometime this summer. Then I would plan to do a workshop. We'd come back to you and kind of talk like we are today, lessons learned from this first round. What do we like? What do we want to change? And then we would do a second offering with those larger parcels. And then we would have a board meeting where, again, the board would vote on who staff is going to move forward and negotiate leases with. So some strategy, why we would like to, or what we think supports this model. We will learn from the RFP process as we go. I think in carbon sequestration, Ben and I learned every single lease we negotiated. We learned something new and then applied that to the next lease. So this is a great opportunity. It minimizes risk because we're only locking in a lot of these smaller parcels. So as we're learning, we can make those changes for some of our bigger land holdings. It's an opportunity to generate multiple leases. I think that'd be a great success story to say we did an RFP and now have 8 new leases or whatever the case may be. We think we can bolster competition. It allows time for a large parcel analysis to get those large parcels ready. And it supports some of the state geothermal initiatives and goals. So in terms of the RFP, we're going to have a response time of 45 to 60 days. Statutorily, we have to do 30 or 35, so we're well within that time. Board approval, every recommendation would be brought to the board for approval, and the board would approve who we negotiate a lease with. In this first round, we have identified 12,000 acres, and that is going through internal review. So we don't know if all 12,000 are going to be approved and ready to lease, but that is currently what is being reviewed. And then the criteria that we would, or that operators would be evaluated on. So they would be evaluated on their experience, financing availability, their rent and royalty offers, surface footprint, and community engagement plans. I just put that up there because we're not really looking to recommend whoever is bidding the highest price. We're looking at all of these factors, and I think the community engagement plans are a big piece of this as well. So wanted to make note of that. I don't know what's going on with the formatting here. I'm going to blame the conversion of slides, but that's all. That's all I have. Any questions? Yes.
Have you talked to other states that have geothermal assets, and is there anything to be learned from their developmental process?
We met with a lot of multiple states, and we have multiple, like a few different lease forms from other states, but a lot of our initial meetings, I feel like everyone's new, everyone's learning, and the geothermal space is different region-wise. I think everyone's just learning right now, so there hasn't been too many like lessons learned.
There's no industry leader out there, so to speak.
Probably the furthest along from a state land board perspective is probably Utah. They have a project that is producing on their state trust lands. Utah. Sitla is there. And so they, we met with them for, we've probably met with them for a total of 2 hours in multiple goes. And they've shared some lessons learned with us that I think have been helpful just around I'd say mostly around kind of size of parcels and sort of the location of parcels and how they identified which parcels needed to kind of go up. And a lot of that, frankly, led to this RFI idea, which is said, let's let industry help us out here and give us the information we need so we can move ahead in the way that we're recommending to you today.
And even Washington did an RFI similar with efficient markets. And so talking with them, Washington learned a lot from that process. So that also kind of helped guide us as well.
I have 2 questions. First, from a business proposal, I mean, these are competitive. When they submit their information to you, the financials and others, does that come under the Sunshine Act or can that be totally confidential?
So right now in the RFI process, all submissions are confidential.
Confidential just to our staff?
Yes. And are not subject to disclosure. As we go through the process, the rules start to shift, especially after awards are made. But currently, everything is still confidential.
Because, I mean, fledgling project like this, you feel like they do want to keep their material confidential. And I guess that leads to my next question about the length of the lease, because I think we're learning that there's a lot that goes into the preparation. What will these lease lengths be?
I think that's what we're trying to decide, and we've been format wise, originally we've had a model that has an exploration lease and then separately you come and negotiate a production lease. But I think that I would be looking to try to combine those and have like an expiration time period and hurdles that you have to meet. And then it automatically goes into the production phase, just so we have one lease. But we talked with industry about what's a reasonable amount of time. We don't want to force you into anything too fast, but we want to make sure this isn't being sat on for too long. And what we heard was every project is different. Every project requires, if they already have seismic, then they don't have to do, then they're faster along, or if they have test well information. So it's kind of all over the board. So then we were thinking, well, each of these probably has to be individually looked at and the hurdles set individually.
Okay, Commissioner, kind of to add on to that, the exploration phase of EGS costs, we've learned that it costs, $5 million or so. It's way more than any of our other lines of business. And so these operators are going to want an option to go to a production lease and not just what we normally give them, which is a right of first refusal to negotiate. And so I think we're learning that. As far as the term of the lease, I don't know this for certain, but I think that these operators are going to take a page out of the renewable energy book in that they term them to the length of a power purchase agreement with the utility. And so those, are typically somewhere around 30 to 40 years where they can they have a contract to sell their power to the utility for that long. And so they would want to match the lease with us to that date.
So I'm not familiar with the state's geothermal initiative. If you want to summarize that real quickly. I know it's also a Department of Energy also is supportive. So I'm guessing there might be some federal support that these companies or operators can tap into. And then the linkage, we started out the conversation with proximity to transmission. So when we are looking at our releasing of, these opportunities or parcels, are you putting that into consideration as well?
Yeah, we have a map layer of the transmission lines. So
Thank you, new renewable energy program.
so we would look to, if we do an RFP and we're putting that GIS information online, putting the transmission lines up as well. And a lot of the parcels that received interest, they might have noted in it that the project they're looking to do this is an ideal location due to its proximity to a transmission line. So some of those were already pointed out. One operator was like, please don't do that because then that shows everyone like the research we've done already. So
It's pretty public.
yeah.
I would assume see that.
And then you also asked about
The state initiative.
state initiative. I think it's like the Heat Beneath Our Feet initiative that Governor.
I've heard of, that's as much as I.
Yeah, that's much.
There's kind of two prongs to this, I think. And one of them was the geothermal rulemaking and putting that under the ECMC's purview and creating a regulatory structure that was much more defined than it was a handful of years ago. We were involved in that as staff, and our legal counsel was helping us out with reviewing that, and we provided a lot of comment that we think was useful for that process. So that's kind of, and that's pretty much done now.
That was my question.
Yeah,
Like,
and so that-
is it done?
Yeah, and so
Mhm.
that sits under ECMC, and ECMC now has the authority to regulate this,
Deep
the deep geothermal.
Cause
which
they
is really-
came and kind of briefed us.
Yes,
Mhm.
correct. And then the second piece of that is, the Energy Office has a grant program, as well, that's aimed toward, geothermal developers and, promoting geothermal developers to come to Colorado and begin projects. And there's a whole nother presentation probably on that initiative.
Well, and that's closed now.
And that's
Yeah.
closed, but is kind of.
But
going through-
they'll likely do more rounds.
thing.
And they have tax incentives available. That's really
Mm-hmm.
the main financial incentive right now in Colorado.
And these two things are what's really driving the market here in a lot of ways. That's why these companies are so interested in Colorado, is now it's clear whether it's, that it's the surface estate that owns the geothermal, whereas a couple of years ago that wasn't clear. And so these pieces of legislation have really opened up the market for geothermal. So that, along with EGS and the new technology.
Right.
Going good. So,
Yeah, but.
Well, I was just gonna, tying on to that, I was curious, so is there a way, given that it all is so nascent and it is a state priority, is there a way for us to front end load this process with, ECMC and the Energy Office to kind of tie some of this stuff together for accelerated review? And because we're embarking on a new chapter that's very supportive of what they're trying to do, and we've heard from industry, it takes a long time for the permits and everything else. So maybe could we work with them and get kind of a special consideration?
I mean,
I'll
usually
take
we're.
I'll take a step.
Yeah, I was
I think
gonna-
what we heard from industry is the landowner and land tenure is our step one. And so we need you guys putting it out there so we can then go, because a lot of the grants and things that they can apply for at the federal and even Excel and other kind of and utility kind of projects are all saying, that's great, but what sort of land tenure do you have? Right? Are we going to be putting our money somewhere to somebody who doesn't actually have anything? So I think the message we got from industry is, yeah, put it out there so we can bid on it. That's the best thing you can do for us and to get these things going and get us into the rest of the pipelines. And so I think that's kind of our goal.
But I'd like to add that if we could have a special, we tell people all the time that we're like every other landowner. We don't get special privileges. So I think this would be different than that. But we are, like Ben said, we're in communication with the ECMC and the Energy Office all the time. We have these interagency carbon management meetings where we're updating everyone what's going on. So we're all in the loop and want to support each other. But we don't get fast tracked or anything. If that was a possibility, that would really promote doing development on our lands. Doesn't exist
And
right now.
I could add on to that as well. I meet monthly with ECMC and the Colorado Energy Office, and they are just as eager as we are to get the first one going. And so, yeah, and so I think, we're in communication on exactly what we're doing. They're up to date on our RFI and our next steps. And so I think they're excited to see who we're working with, and I think they're excited to get their own programs going as well. So
you're saying it might happen organically, that sort of accelerated, let's look at this today rather than 2 months from now. kind of
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
yeah, and this is moving.
The flip kind of, not the flip side, but the other kind of half of that coin is that we are in a state where our geology is different. You can't just take a project from Nevada and bring it to Colorado and do the same thing. Our geology doesn't work that way. We are kind of the end of the geothermal resource in the West, right? It ends basically at the Front Range, if you in broad geologic terms. And it gets sort of cooler and more sporadic as you go from California to Colorado, right? The hottest, most consistent stuff is in California and Nevada, a little less in Utah, a little less in us in Wyoming and so forth. It's just the way the geology works. So a lot of this new technology stuff is stuff that they're looking at here. And so that new technology adds another layer of risk and another layer of timeline on top of some of these investments. So
So you mentioned the BLM model for royalties. So will this make us money?
We think it will. Yeah, and I think it remains to be. I guess I'll inject my own view that I think the BLM rates are probably artificially low. And they were put in place to promote geothermal development and good, right? But that is, nevertheless, that is the standard for which we are, now measured. A lot of these projects, currently geothermal projects, are on BLM land. There's a lot of BLM land in Nevada and Utah, so that's part of it, but that's sort of the standard. We'll see what happens. We intend to ask, sort of solicit that part in the RFP and say, hey, what do you want to pay for this one? And see what we get for that.
And the BLM model includes a royalty, right?
Yeah, it does.
So, and the thing about geothermal is it's consistent, unlike wind and solar, it's consistent. And so, from a very small footprint, they can consistently, 24/7 be producing power that they're selling onto the grid. And we would get a percentage of that. So I think it's higher megawatts. So I think there's a lot of a lot of opportunity financially for us in this line of business. There's also one of the behind the meter. There's the whole move of data centers, and they utilities are not able to support their power needs, and so they're starting to look at their own power. As you've heard with Microsoft and 3 Mile Island and all that, but here in Colorado, a lot of them are looking at geothermal and behind the grid. So I think there's an opportunity there as well.
Even if we match the BLM, which is being done in other states, and those states are making money at this. So,
Well, and it sort of supports your logic of let's start with a few parcels that there's a few players on, see where we can go, and then we prove it up and we can increase our rates as there appears to be demand.
Even like with oil and gas, the state land board used to mirror the BLM originally because they're at 12.5%. And then as the industry grew, we were able to keep continually raising our rate to now 20%, because that's what the market rate is. The BLM is still at the 12.5%. So they are very low industry for oil and gas, but for geothermal, since this is so new, I don't really see a problem starting at their level because it's such a new industry. So
I'm just, our organization's looking at this too. We're having a lot of conversations with geothermal. We're doing data center work. So I was curious, but I'd love to see a picture of what it looks like. I get the drilling afterwards. Like, is it a set of buildings? What do these facilities look like once it's
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. We even thought about like whether we should put them in this presentation, but I think there's so many what ifs. It just depends what type of project they're doing and like how much steam there might be, what type of footprint it's gonna be. And yeah.
What does your neighborhood look like?
Right.
That's another piece. Right. A lot of these we've seen on state lands in Utah, for example, there is a producing geothermal plant. There is nothing. I mean, it is sagebrush as far as the eye can see. I don't think there's a home visible. There's not, right? And so this is a fundamentally different environment than we're probably working with in the parcels that we have here.
I was just
More
curious.
populated. Yeah. So
Maybe we won't be doing it on Lowry.
well, who knows? Who knows? So, I think that
On that point, sorry to interrupt.
yeah.
Yeah.
Please.
Just want to underscore, we will not be including Mount Princeton in this RFP.
At least it's current.
Yeah, that's
At least round one. So, but yeah, so I think we've been told by operators there's a lot we can do in designing plants to make them appropriate for the place that they are
there.
And so I think that remains to be seen, and we're excited to see what those might look like when we get to that point.
Super exciting. Yeah, it is. And thanks for the update.
Yeah, just to recap, we're Ben is leading a line of business review internally and with CPW on these parcels. After that, we will send letters to the individual counties like we do with oil and gas. And there's a list that ECMC keeps of the county delegates. And because ECMC is the regulator of geothermal, that's why we're sending it to that list. And then we'll run the first request for proposals and come back to you with a recommendation on those.
And I would just say, based on our conversation, the first hour this morning, the more we can cooperate at the outset
Yeah,
with those folks who will have the ultimate end authority, the more reliable. this
yeah,
will be.
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Super interesting.
Thank you.
And I think then, does 10 minutes work for us, or 15 minutes to go grab some lunch, and we'll have a working lunch, if that's all right with everybody? Matt, I hope you're okay with, I guess you get a free sandwich, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
All right, let's
you.
reconvene at 4:15.
Up here again, to look pretty.
I appreciate it. Bring up the average.
Yeah, I know all about that.
Good afternoon, commissioners. Matt LaFontaine, real estate program manager, and with me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Ben Custer, solid minerals manager. Today I'll be providing some background on the REPI initiative. I know some of this will be new information for a couple of the commissioners, but I'll update on where we are thus far in this framework, and we'll also talk about some aspects of Table Mountain in particular. This is an information item, so there's no direct decision required or requested from the board at this time. Then after our presentation, Matt Moorhead with TMC and the other conservation partners will provide a short presentation on REPI respective as it relates to conservation, and particularly the Sentinel landscape, the Pikes Peak Sentinel landscape initiative that's also on the way. First and foremost, the REPI framework allows the board to selectively dispose of a handful of large trust properties in south central Colorado that together make up an important landscape. Due to partner and board requirements under the framework, these disposals will result in perpetual conservation via conservation easements, while ensuring that the board obtains full unencumbered value for the properties. REPI stands for the Readiness and Environmental Protection Integration Program. REPI funds are made available through the Department of Defense, and they're allocated down to the services and then down to the individual installations. And they're designed to protect areas around bases that are critical for operations and training. And as you'll see momentarily, we have quite a lot of land that is in the immediate proximity to some of those properties. From the state land board perspective, this is a unique outcome-based 10-year framework. The board voted to approve the framework in 2023. It involves 6 properties. And each property will come to the board individually for approval by the board when and if it's there's funding and the ability to move forward with the disposal. So I mentioned that we have some select properties in the vicinity of Colorado Springs. If you look at this map, you'll see the Colorado Springs metro area here. Air Force Academy is located approximately here. Schriever Space Force Base here. So about 8 years ago, the board had a handful of conversations, started a series of conversations with representatives, the conservation community and Department of Defense about protecting some of these lands that were critical to military operations. The Air Force Academy has identified 3 state land board properties that are of particular interest to it. Those are Bohart, which you see here, Big Springs here, and Edison here. You'll see that all 3 of those underlie these green areas, which fan out from the Air Force Academy. These are aerial training areas that are used for flight operations and training of airmen. In fact, on Bohart, there's a landing strip located approximately here that's used for touch and go training. So pretty consistent landing and takeoff operations there. Schriever Space Force Base is particularly interested in the lands adjacent to it, developing those. In fact, their satellite arrays all point south. and keeping that line of sight open for them is critically important. And then, of course, Fort Carson, located here in this black boundary, is immediately adjacent to Table Mountain, which we'll be talking about in greater depth today, and the Aiken Canyon property located here. I mentioned that each of these properties will be approved individually by the board. So far, the only full and formal approval that the board has provided has been for Bohart, and that disposal is underway. Due to the size and value of these properties, the framework allows for phased transactions over time. Thus far, we've completed 2 with respect to Bohart. This is a potential timeline with these several properties, several installations, and several services. There's this is a moving target, and it has evolved over time. You'll see Bohart running approximately 2023 to 2028. I mentioned we've done 2 phases of disposal for that thus far. Each of the installations is only allowed under this framework to move forward with a single transaction at a time. So you'll see that Edison and Big Springs would occur if approved by the board subsequent to the full and complete disposal of Bohart. Schriever is in kind of the early steps of due diligence on both sides. Some REPI funds had been allocated to Schriever that were going to be used to purchase private lands to the north, and it looks like those may be reallocated toward the lands to the south in the near future. But we'll be moving forward at the staff level with obtaining appraisals of that property in the near future. And then Table Mountain, of course, as I mentioned, we're talking more about today. Table Mountain is an interesting property based in part on its strategic location immediately west of Table Mountain, but also because it's a large, intact property that's adjacent to existing development and has significant mining potential or mineral potential on the property. Starting in around 2024, State Land Board staff completed numerous on-site tours of the property with our conservation partners and other stakeholder representatives that were interested in long-term conservation of the property, including the Colorado State Forest Service, the U.S. Forest Service, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and DNR. These on-site conversations included discussion on the high development potential of the property, potential grant funding opportunities, and how, in addition to the surface estate, the conservation partners desire to obtain a non-development agreement or some similar structure that would limit additional surface disturbance related to mine expansions in the future. In the board packet, you will see some information on the Forest Legacy Program, and there's an indication in there that approximately $3.8 billion had been preliminarily awarded for this acquisition. That is a little less certain than was indicated in the board materials. We found out very recently that that approval had been removed from the most recent congressional budget. So a quick update on that piece. There are 2 significant mines in place in operation on Table Mountain. The existing mines are not a part of the area that's contemplated for transaction under the disposal, but the potential expansion areas and the additional mineral resources are. So we'll talk about that a little bit today. Up on your screen right now is the GCC mine. So one of the 2 major operations where they are mining gypsum. And then this is the Wholesome quarry that's kind of located right on the top of Table Mountain. This is a kind of a parcel breakout of lands that are immediately northeast of Table Mountain. So you see the state trust land here in blue, and you can see the level of subdivision that's occurred and is approaching up to our property. Highway 115 here, and then Fort Carson here for reference. I think this picture demonstrates the level of residential developability of at least a part of our site. So here's a picture or a map rather of Table Mountain, and we can start talking about some of the real specifics here as pertain to this property. Within the purple boundary is the contemplated transaction area. You'll see the carve outs of the two mines, both the Wholesome existing lease and the GCC lease. And then you'll see these two areas that are expansion lease or lease expansion requests that have been put forth by the mine operators. In 2024, staff internally valued what these minerals would look like from a royalty perspective to the state land board if we were to move forward with leasing them over time, and concluded that those were worth up to $50 million in gross royalties, which equated to about a $15 million present value. In December of 2024, we brought that information to the board and also requested that we get the authority to use I&D funds to obtain a third-party market appraisal. And so we did that, and part of this presentation today is to provide the results of that appraisal to the board. Also, early in 2025, we obtained a surface appraisal. That appraisal indicated that that Table Mountain, as contemplated here, was worth approximately $27.1 million. I mentioned this non-development agreement concept or similar structure that we've been discussing. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between the MVS appraisal, the third-party appraisal, and our internal staff evaluation. So the results of the third-party appraisal were a little bit surprising to staff. The appraisal came in valuing the expansion resource at $3.45 million, which was significantly below the $15 million in present value terms that staff had valued the resource at. And so we spent quite a bit of time digging into why there was this valuation gap. And ultimately, it boils down to there being a difference in the way that we, as a trust that has a level of certainty around the future monetization of a mineral resource, and lower risks associated with our specific ownership structure, those being we don't pay any sort of taxes, we don't have any carrying costs, we don't have any opportunity costs because we are precluded from actually selling our mineral resources. And ultimately, we would utilize a much lower discount rate in our discounted capital analysis than a third party appraiser or a third party purchaser would. A lot of those kind of distinctions are spelled out in a little more depth in the board materials. But I think it's an important distinction to just state, which is that there seems to be a difference in valuation perspectives here between how staff thinks, what staff thinks the resource is worth to us and what an appraiser has concluded they're worth to another party. So coming out of today's information item, I'd like to answer any questions that are out there about REPI in particular. But I also put forth three action items that staff intends to take following this subject to the board's commentary. One of these items is to discuss further this mineral value gap with our conservation partners and see if there's a way to close that from that perspective, alternative funding sources, and so on. A second is to look at a kind of a reimagining of the project area to exclude the expansion area so that the mineral value difference is not as significant of an issue between the parties. And then the third, unrelated to the value gap, but important relative to what we've been discussing in terms of strategic planning and asset allocation, is to ensure that our consultants for those two projects are considering the REPI framework in its totality and the pros and cons of these contemplated land disposals relative to the portfolio. And I know I kind of went through that a little faster than I maybe intended to, and you can step back to any part within that if that helps the discussion.
I have a question, please. No, it was Trust for Public Land that actually was in the negotiation, right? Have we actually seen any money from that first payment?
Yes, and so thank you for clarifying that. And asking the question. There are three primary kind of conservation sponsors associated with this. Those are TNC, TPL, and then Palmer. And we have representatives from all three of them either present or available on Zoom right now. We have closed 2 phases from Bohart. And those in total have provided approximately $13.35 million of NSE funds that we have received in hand and either spent for.
Say that last sentence.
We have received approximately $13.35 million of NSE funds from those 2 transactions. We utilized the first phase in part for our acquisition of Lake Fork Ranch. Proceeds from the second phase are currently held in the NSE fund.
Or you're landing on this for a discussion piece?
Yes.
The parcel like this is like part of the value, right? I'm surprised that the gap is as big as it is on the mineral side. Having said that, our look at it, I think as we come to this transaction would be one of more opportunity cost. The fair market value is, of course, the perspective of a third party. And I suppose that gives us flexibility in that our mandate is to sell properties no less than fair market value. It also provides then a conundrum for the conservation partners who need to buy at fair market value. So I suspect we'll be doing some work on that. The question I have is, another component of the values I remember from before was, potential highest and best uses residential development. As the mines would expand and there's not that much left, it seems that some of these plans would affect the relative value of residential development because of the increasing footprint, the noise, the issues, less land to work with, et cetera. What's your thought on?
Nick, are you able to put the slide back up? Or do I just click on it?
You slow, sorry. Not that direction.
A couple components to that answer. One is we are only able to actually sell the surface estate.
Right.
Through 2 appraisals, we have come to an agreement, or we have come to concur with the appraisals. And their kind of definition of the highest and best use, which is a kind of large lot residential development at most dense. There are areas of the property that could be very densely developed, particularly along Highway 115, where it's generally flat.
Southern part more?
Kind of in the middle, actually, in the area of the GCC mine thereabouts. Sorry, after it were reclaimed in the future, particularly though. So we don't have a value gap with respect to the surface value at this time. I mean, I think that staff has reviewed the appraisal. It's been appraised by 2 appraisers, and we're comfortable with their opinion of the market value at this time. There are concepts within the mining use where, if we take Wholesome, for example, that currently has this portion under lease, there could be kind of a rolling reclamation and new disturbance implemented where the total existing surface disturbance doesn't really exceed what it does today. And so I don't think that you end up with, additional significant loss of, of residential potential because of additional mining. If that answers that portion of that question.
Yeah, guess I could see that. My next question would be Fort Carson. You listed some of the things that a lot of these agencies are looking for in the way of protection. Does allowing mining, whether it's a smaller footprint or a larger footprint, the attributes of those activities will Fort Carson, will that meet their need if we continue to allow mining?
There are a number of things that Fort Carson would like to see with regards to conservation or limitations on this property. Those are involved, frequency and timing, blasting, trucks along the highway, residential development in particular, and people having concerns or complaints about noise and artillery and all sorts of other aspects related to the military operation. Any expansion of the existing mines would still be subject to the permitting process and allow for those considerations to be taken into account. But I think that their perspective, as has been relayed to us, is the maximum effect, the maximum amount that it could be limited. That'd be their preference.
But the residential is actually more problematic, so hence again, no real conflict on the fee, just on the mineral NDA.
Right. And again, I think that those are both taken into account under this framework. There would be no significant additional mineral operational impact beyond what kind of exists today. It would just be a different location.
And if it's helpful, there's sort of on this map here, this is a pretty busy map, but there's sort of some hashed areas within the purple here and right here. And these are the approximate extents of the mining disturbance as it currently exists on the property.
Oh, right, the hatched areas, I saw this.
Yeah.
From a, I don't know, maybe there's a Mindy or a Lindsay question from a conservation perspective. Impacts, species in that area, does this rolling expansion of the mining affect any of our conservation oriented objectives?
That's a great question. This is. I don't know if it's recorded. You got second, the conservation and stewardship manager, whatever. I think in this area, we're looking at mostly large game. The only species of concern that I'm really aware of as a tier 1 species is the Mexican spotted owl. That's just on the northwest corner of this property and actually located mostly off of our property on BLM land. But our northern access, and I think it's outside the purple area. Is that right? Is that not considered or contemplated? So that's outside the area of sale. And the rest of that area isn't quite as steep and conducive for the Mexican spotted owl. But since this is an existing use and predated our line of business reviews, I'll be honest, we haven't done our traditional standard stewardship review.
Well, there's already been this disturbance for quite some time. Other commissioners, any questions on REPI in general? Commissioner Whipple, I know this is new to you. And then maybe after we see if there's any more questions, then did we want to hear from any of the partners? I guess a leading question on that would be, given the complexity and the value gap,
What now?
yeah, how are you feeling about it? And yeah, and I guess I would say for myself as a commissioner, having I am a strong supporter of this REPI win-win-win framework and approach. And in this property, it seems very important for the connectivity for a lot of the lands around it. And so if it came to that, I would be interested in also hearing a proposal of, you're meeting somewhere and it's not achieving the full opportunity cost as we see it for our minerals for an Indian.
It might be a good time to turn over to Matt Moorhead, who is going to talk a little bit about the Pikes Peak Sentinel landscape, maybe able to give a perspective on the value gap from
That'd be great.
conservation partners.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Nice to see you all again. Matt Moorhead with the Nature Conservancy. I would also, well, I want to sort of just briefly characterize the REPI work in this part of Colorado as a foundation of what we call the SOAR partnership, the Security, Open Space, and Agricultural Resilience Project. Fundamentally, this is not a project that is a Nature Conservancy project. It's a project that is at its root a pretty unusual equal collaboration amongst three conservation organizations and a NGO that is focused on actually community and military cooperation and issue resolution. I would like to take the opportunity to allow my colleagues Wade Shelton and Jeff Jackson to introduce themselves and their organizations and their role in SOAR.
Certainly, Matt, I'll go first. Wade Shelton, Senior Project Manager, and Jeff's Conservation Fellow for the Colorado and Southwest Office of the Trust for Public Land. Yeah, that's a bit of a mouthful of a title. I'm the lead for TPL on what we were calling SOAR, or Security, Open Space, and Agricultural Resilience. It's the partnership between our four organizations. And TPL, as was alluded to earlier, we are the lead contracting entity with the Air Force Academy. So that means projects like Bohart. Well, we are technically in the lead on that. One of the beauties of the SOAR partnership is that if you get one of us, you get all of us. So it doesn't really matter in a lot of respects of who is the proverbial tip of the spear, because Matt and I both talk quite a bit. And, you know, if Matt's out front, he's got me and Jeff and our team, Jeff Jackson from the Palmer Land Conservancy backing him up, and vice versa on all these other projects. So happy to be here virtually today and answer whatever questions I can and give you a little bit more background about how we've tackled some of these valuation issues on Bohart. Jeff?
Yep. Good afternoon, everyone. Jeff Jackson with Palmer Land Conservancy. Palmer is a regional land trust that's been headquartered in Colorado Springs since the late 70s. And Palmer is the contractual lead on the REPI program with regard to Schriever Space Force Base. But as both Matt and Wade had alluded to, we all work together on all these projects. Just we technically can only have one entity that's a partner per installation. And look forward to providing any information that might be helpful.
And by process of elimination, this means the Nature Conservancy is the lead conservation organization working legally under legal agreement with the U.S. Army. We were in the process of putting a new, what they call an installation partnership or management agreement in place with U.S. Army Fort Carson. Last but not least, I do want to reference the Colorado Defense Alliance and its principal, Keith Klain, who I believe is actually presented on, I think you've all met Keith a time or two over the years. And it's he is also an integral part of this effort, really helping run the trap lines, both from the command level at the individual installations, local community elected leaders, officials, et cetera, all the way up through the National Department of Defense to help make sure this thing moves and meets its myriad intrinsic goals and values for Colorado here. I think I'd like to since we were just on the tail end of some of the specific questions about Table Mountain, should we address those first before we do brief updates on Bohart, Schriever Space Force Base, and Sentinel? I'll throw that out to you.
Continue the thread. That makes sense to me. Are you guys okay? Sure.
Okay. I think if I recall a couple of the points there, Commissioner Frobe, you mentioned some questions around ecological value of this from a partnership perspective. If I can draw your attention to the map on the screen, I will be talking about this map in the context of the Sentinel landscape here in a little bit. But as you can see, Fort Carson in the pink, sort of in the south middle of the map, and Table Mountain is the patch of blue just to its left or west side. What you're seeing is that patch of blue connects to the yellow, which is BLM, which connects to the green, which is U.S. Forest Service. And then as it goes through Fort Carson, which is the undeveloped, what they call the cantonment is the developed sort of city part of Fort Carson, which is all in the north quadrant. The rest of Fort Carson is predominantly managed as an open natural area for training. And so Table Mountain was adjacent to that open natural area. And as you'll see, just to the south of the arrow that's on the screen right now, it will, you see what is actually over 50,000 acres of conservation easement and growing that was originally triggered by a military conservation partnership starting in the year 2000. That is now 50,000 acres of conservation that connects all the way south to the Arkansas River, Pueblo Lake State Park, and the Pueblo State Wildlife Area as well. So effectively, what Table Mountain is representing here from a conservation, an ecology conservation perspective, it is the last largest connecting piece along the Highway 115 corridor that connects all of those public land holdings to high elevations and Forest Service, to the open sagebrush and pinyon juniper country of Vail Lamb, through across Fort Carson all the way down to the Arkansas River. With the exception of the much smaller Aiken Canyon area, Table Mountain is the single remaining large undeveloped track along Highway 115 between US Highway 50 and Colorado Springs. So that is, from an ecology perspective, that is the driving goal of the conservation of Table Mountain. The other issue that I just wanted to address briefly, the split valuation issue as far as the minerals. It's challenging. I'm no doubt that it's going to be a challenge, but everything we're looking at on that map here has presented a challenge to conservation, even to sort of get as far as we are. I wanted to tip the hat to the staff who have really created a very new, innovative approach to the mineral and conservation issue. This did not exist 10 years ago. And so staff have found a way, working with legal authorities, et cetera, that there is a conservation path forward if we can make the math work, if we can make the numbers match up. At this stage, in my appraisal experience, so long as the analysis in an appraisal is credible and defensible, you can have two appraisers with drastically different outcomes, equally defensible in that space. So this may sound a little bit strange. I'm relatively indifferent at the moment. I'm relatively indifferent to the values we're talking about. I am most interested in finding a way to reach agreement with the State Land Board, the conservation partners, and our military and other conservation funding partners, that we can find a number that makes things move forward, that is credible and defensible through an adequate analysis. So I think that's the space that I expect to be working on with staff here in the coming year, is how do we get to that spot? What is that spot, and how do we get there adequately? It'll be a decent amount of work, but we'll figure it out. With that, unless you have additional questions on the Table Mountain portion, I'd like to turn it over to Wade Shelton for a rundown on where we are and where we expect to be on the next phase of the Bohart transition.
Thank you, Matt. Matt LaFontaine, do you have access to the that Bohart phasing map that I sent you yesterday? If we could put that on the screen.
We do
Just
not.
Yeah,
we don't have that teed up, but for the purposes of this, I think it's generally the southernmost portion of the remainder of the board's ownership.
I can share that map if you like, or we can just go verbal. It's whatever works best for you guys.
You should be able to share it from your end. If you want to do that, go ahead.
I will go ahead and do that. So yeah, thank you, Matt. Moorhead, happy to talk to you guys a bit more about the Bohart Ranch and where we are, with current phasing. Let me bring up the phasing map so you can see that. I'm sending a request so I can share it. And I don't know if somebody on the other end is going to have to approve it, or I can just go off the cuff. That's fine. It's not a problem for me. Still not letting me. There we go. Okay, now it's working. Thank you.
Okay, never a dull moment.
Indeed. There we go. Technology is great when it works. So what you're seeing here is the 48,000 acre Bohart Ranch. Phase one is highlighted in green. We closed that in October of 2023. Phase two is highlighted in orange. We closed that in August of 2025. And then what we are projecting to be phase three, which is highlighted in blue, with the remaining future phases highlighted in purple. As Matt LaFontaine already laid out, we've closed two phases of this transaction, totaling about 19,000 acres total. We are anticipating that phase three will be a similar size to phase two, probably around 7,200 acres, depending on how the dust settles. We've been using the same appraiser for the appraisal work on this, and we spoke to Bill Bortz on Friday last week. He was not expecting to see any significant change in the fair market value for phase three compared to phase two. So, we should be in the ballpark of 7,100 to 7,200 acres there, depending on what we settle on. And the plan, and I'm pleased to report, that we have the funding that we need for phase three already. The initial and since we're buying and holding each of these phases until we can replace enforceable deed restrictions that are held by the Palmer Land Conservancy with a conservation easement that'll be held by Colorado Cattlemen's Agricultural Land Trust. Some of the funding that we've secured won't be released till we put the conservation easement in place. So we're using private funding, bridge financing, that sort of thing, to bridge the gap between the REPI funding we already have secured and other funding sources like GOCO that we're able to provide funding for the phase two purchase, that sort of thing. And much like on Table Mountain, although it's not a mineral issue, we have run into some of the initial or the unique appraisal questions. Appraising is an art, not a science, of different funders have different appraisal standards, different requirements, and those can result in different fair market values depending on the instructions and the approach the appraiser has to take. So what we've done with the first two phases of Bohart, and we'll continue to do that with phase three, is it's TPL's, TNC's, and Palmer's job to bring in the private funding, the bridge financing that allows us to be more creative and ultimately make sure that we settle on the appraisal approach that works first and foremost for the land board. So we're coming up with a fair market value that makes sense to your staff, makes sense to us, and we can justify on our end. We often have had to use a different appraisal standard. I won't bore you all with the different appraisal standards unless you want me to get into that. But we have to use a different standard for REPI funding or Department of Agriculture Natural Resource Conservation Service funding than we do for GOCO or the land board or private funding sources. But that often means we've had more than one appraisal to ultimately justify everything for each of these first two phases, and we'll probably have to do that for phase three. But that's exactly why the conservation partners are here, that we can be that bridge that can take the more creative, multifaceted approach that we need so that these purchases make financial sense for the land board, meet your fiduciary responsibility to education in Colorado, but also enable the conservation partners to meet our requirements for funders like REPI, like GOCO, like NRCS, like the Forest Service, and so on. So for phase three, we're anticipating a summer closing to buy roughly another 7,100, 7,200 acres from you all. TPL will hold that property. Palmer Land Conservancy will hold the deed restrictions on it. And in all likelihood, that initial purchase will be funded by a combination of REPI funding that we have already secured, and either private funds or bridge financing that will ultimately be replaced by funding from USDA and NRCS, and then the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, which is the nonprofit arm of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, once we ultimately put a conservation easement over all three phases. Our plan, once we close on phase three, is to then pivot to replacing the deed restrictions on phases 1 through 3 with a conservation easement that we hope to close. An ambitious timeline would be the end of this year. I think next winter or spring is more realistic. And then ultimately look to sell that property to a private producer, subject to the conservation easement. So basically getting to a place where we own a little bit more than half of Bohart, then following through on replacing the deed restrictions with the conservation easement and selling it, so we can demonstrate how these acquisitions will ultimately work from start to finish while we continue to finish up the remaining phases of Bohart. So we're really excited to have this continued success with you all. We're really seeing a lot of positive feedback, especially in terms of funding from the Air Force and the Department of Defense. Once we got phase 3 funded, illustrating that, they thought that, oh, we won't be able to get you any funding for phase 2. They actually got us $2.5 million for phase 2. And right now we have over $4 million that's that's secured for phase 3 and future phases, with potentially more coming, at the end of the month. So we really appreciate your all's patience with, getting this one put together, but Bohart seems to be rolling at a very steady, consistent pace now. Questions? Matt LaFontaine, any other details you want me to get into?
I would just point out for the board that the bullseye, you can see the outline of it there. And that's going to be reserved, that portion of the property will be reserved until the final phase for the board to help incentivize the full takedown of the property.
Well said. That is the main priority for the Air Force. So we want to leave that to last, not do it right away.
Wade Shelton, Jim Preble here.
Jim, good to hear your voice again. Been a while.
I'm confident this project will be much more successful than the last one you and I worked on 15 years ago.
And we picked up the pieces from that after that. Fisher's Peak State Park wasn't too bad a win for us.
All right, good. Well, good to see you again after all these years. Thank you.
Likewise, sir.
Jeff, shall we move on to Schriever?
Yes, glad to do so. This is a short update, as Matt LaFontaine referred to earlier. Working with the base, and they are working to prioritize their internal strategy as to what they want to pursue first. And we're right on the line between one private property and some of the state land board properties. And so we're hoping to have that information here in the next few weeks. If not, it might be a month. And then we will have direction. If we end up going towards the state land board property after we make this decision, then it will be focusing on phase 1 purchase of the southern properties that are abutting the boundary of Schriever Space Force Base, and some of the western properties that are abutting the boundary as well. So that's where we would focus for a first phase under Schriever. But again, still awaiting final decision from the base as to what the priority will be, whether it's going to be private lands or state land board properties. And that's all I have for Schriever.
Questions?
Did you want to just talk Sentinel landscape real quick?
This, if we could go back to the original map. So I just want to give you all a brief update and on something called Sentinel Landscape. And the State Land Board has had a significant role in catalyzing this. This is sort of a nice to know offshoot of the collaboration and partnership you've all been a part of. So the Sentinel Landscape Program is a partnership between the U.S. Department of Defense, the U.S. Department of Interior, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. It was created, roughly speaking, about a decade ago. After the success of the REPI program, after the past 23 years, the U.S. military started recognizing increasingly the value of partnerships, bringing expertise, resources, attention to issues that they had that they then didn't have to develop that expertise to tackle. Conservation became a huge success story for them. Conservation, of course, matters oftentimes because what is their goal for a place? Nothing. They want nothing to happen there. So conservation is oftentimes a good partner. But what they also started to recognize is that sometimes the real estate transactions alone are not all that is beneficial to achieve conservation. That there are land management, hydrology, fire management issues. There is community engagement, community goodwill, species management, regulatory compliance issues that they have that are better addressed, sometimes not by real estate transactions, but by other forms of collaborations and partnerships. What you are looking at here, the outer sort of hard boundary of this is roughly a little over 2 million acres, about the size of Connecticut, I believe, if I recall the acre size. that is the proposed Sentinel landscape boundary that is being submitted for application to Department of Defense, Department of Ag, Department of Interior next week. I believe by the 27th is the new date. This partnership represents about 36 federal agencies, state agencies, local governments, local government partners, NGOs, at five military installations. It picks up Cheyenne Mountain, otherwise known as NORAD, and Peterson Space Force Base as well, who have been working together to define a set of common goals and objectives that, by working in collaboration, are going to stand a better chance of positively influencing. For example, fire. Forest management and fire. How do we make sure that we can manage these resources for their natural benefit, at the same time try and prepare for when the fires will come, not if the fires are going to come, and how can we steer, how can we manage impact on those such that it does not impact national defense, such that it doesn't burn down Colorado Springs or very much of it, etc. How are we going to organize things like that? What are hydrology impacts that stem from all of those things? What are species impacts? For example, in the one species that we should probably talk about, the U.S. military is paying increasing attention to the pinyon jay. Has a severely declining population trends across its western range. Pretty much 90%, 90+% of Table Mountain and a huge part of the foothills in this geography represented here are habitat for pinyon jay. And so how do we manage for things like that ahead of time, all while potentially creating more outdoor recreation and engagement places for the citizens of Colorado Springs, for the young men and women who serve in the installations as well? How do we make this a place that people want to be and have a positive quality of life while taking care of the resource and the very mechanical reality of our physical infrastructure, national defense, etc. So Sentinel Landscape is really just it is to galvanize partnership. Hey, all of these agencies, you're all working on little pieces of this. Can we plan for implementation at a different scale such that we can achieve greater degrees of efficiency, bring more expertise to the table by tapping into everybody's expertise, and be able to sort of create a plan that we've had one major partner, a funding partner actually in the Colorado Springs area, has characterized this as a bootstrap, sort of self-led ability to create a community vision for a positive future for Colorado Springs and El Paso County. So thank you all, because this is all grown from the partnership that the SOAR partners have developed with the State Land Board. Really, I think we kicked this off in about 2018, 2019, the original conversations. So good things come from these sorts of mission focused. Everybody's been mission focused, but bringing creativity to the table and say, how do we get to some different ends while getting everybody's boxes checked along the way?
I just want to echo what Matt said and just add to that, I think we're on the cusp of having agreements with Cheyenne Mountain Space Force Station and Peterson Space Force Base. And like we alluded to earlier, it doesn't really matter which of us ultimately is the contracting entity for the environmental management agreement with each installation, because they're going to get all of us. And we're on the cusp of doing a acquisition with Colorado Springs Trails, Open Space, and Parks, or TOPS, and CPW to add roughly 500 acres to Cheyenne Mountain State Park that TPL should close on in the next month or two. So that deal would not have been possible without the work we were doing with the land board that, had folks like CPW, like TOPS realizing they should be looking to us, meaning TPL, Palmer, and TNC for help on these kind of acquisitions. So, we're already seeing the work we're doing with you all pollinate more opportunities. And, I think we're all thrilled to be working with the land board.
24 months ago, a Sentinel Landscape designation was also an accelerator towards funding opportunities at the public scale. Federal funds from all three agencies. 24 months from now, I think we have reasonable confidence that it will play that same role. At the moment, I think, as we all know, Colorado and federal government funding are not necessarily meshing as easily as they have at times in the past. However, the fact of the matter is, a Sentinel Landscape Partnership makes sense regardless of whether or not it unlocks additional funding or not. Whatever funding is available there, let's get the right stakeholders at the table, working with each other, bringing expertise and the limited resources they have to work more efficiently. So at the same time, we do also view this project as a place to find common ground and find pathways forward, as this is a project that since its inception has appealed to all sides of the political spectrum. It appeals at a local level, regional level, and a national level. So we are going to continue to push this forward and see if we can find those solutions and get conversations going if they've stopped, and keep conversations going that have not stopped.
Great, that's exciting. Who's on the state land board? Who's our state land board person involved in the Sentinel Lanes?
I've been on a number of the calls. Obviously, Matt is looped in through the SOAR work and so forth. But yeah, I've been part of the phone calls with the group and reviewing the maps and the documents, and it's been very it's been great. Really enjoyed it, and I think it's a great program.
Sort of is similar to, but different than the partnerships, the regional partnerships envisioned under the outdoor strategy. It's almost like that on steroids.
And there's a different, there's a very similar overlap. A lot of the players are involved in both, with a strong driver in this instance of 5 U.S. military installations saying, yes, this is great. We need these things delivered. There is a tremendous focusing power to these conversations as a consequence. That to date we found very useful for opening doors and bringing resources to the table.
Well, good luck.
Yeah, we hope we keep the dealing with the gap and the appraisals.
The next steps on that will be myself and the conservation partners having continuous discussions on ways to bridge that, see if there are creative solutions. We wanted to bring up the issue for a couple reasons. One, it's been a while, but the board in December 2024 authorized the IND expenditure. We had not yet, as staff, provided any update as to the outcome of the mineral appraisal to the board. So we wanted to make you aware of that. And then kind of built into that is this issue that's arisen and needs to be worked through.
Well, good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So.
Last today.
The grand finale.
The grand.
Yes.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Mindy Gottsegen, the the Stewardship and Ecosystem Services Manager. And I'm here today with an information item to update you on what staff's been looking into with artificial intelligence. At your December meeting, Commissioner Mark Harvey brought up the issue, I think it was, that asking if staff had begun to look at this, and indeed we had begun to look at it last summer, and had met several times with Upstream Technology, which supports this lens monitoring platform. I've also been aware of at least 2 others that kind of a more grazing focused, but very limited capacity. And so we were wanted to bring this to you as an information item before proceeding with the information with an investment and development fund request. So this, I also have online Miles Van Blarkum from Upstream Tech. He'll be presenting after me. I'm going to keep my presentation fairly high level. I'm not going to go into depth as much. There is some information in your board packet that is an addendum. I think exhibit 3 is the exhibit, or 1 is the one that shows 2 examples of lens, one with a trespass violation situation we had on our Lorimore property out in Mesa County, and then some agricultural uses as well. So this first slide just shows you a kind of pretty standard section that I just selected kind of randomly. It's in El Paso County, not much going on out there, but you can see I just added 1 little screen snip. This is from a map that's in your board packet as well, just showing the total vegetation amassed over a year across 12 years. And you can see that very top line. Last year was 2025. We had very excellent growth out there. Not sure if it's the warmer climate or all the rain we had out there, but this is something that we can look at on a property by property basis and even compare our properties against the areas around us. So I'll be going through that. So this presentation is really, it hits on the organizational, so excellent. So, and the subtitle that I put on the cover sheet is really one of the sub goals from the board's strategic plan is to invest and apply the best technology to support operations and enhance organizational efficiency. This is a picture of one of our stewardship trust properties, the very southern end of Badger Creek. It's actually Steer Creek, and I kind of selected this picture because it gives you a bit of a landscape view of how do we understand this property, how do we understand it in context. You can see that there's forested lands of varying color. There's been some disease up there. We also have a very important wetland going through this property. And we can use the lens technology to begin to understand the standing carbon mass, the quality of the wetlands, how much of the forage capacity is being used. And these are all metrics or measurements that I know one of the discussions we had yesterday with the emerging strategic plan and some of the feedback from different groups and partners is what kind of metrics are you looking at to define how you accomplish stewardship wetlands. And so this is one additional use that we could use a technology like this. So I just wanted to kind of set the stage a little bit for what we're facing with our lease inspections and some of the tasks that we all have as staff to when we go out and do lease inspections. We have 2.8 million acres of surface land. We have nearly 8,000 leases across 6 districts and 12 lines of business. Our ag leases are inspected kind of at best about once every 5 years. Just 10 years ago, that was only once every 10. Just once every 10 years. Our business program managers inspect active leases on very different schedules. And of course, we have the stewardship trust properties being inspected at least once every 3 years. And then we have lots of other stewardship assessments being done as well. So, and all of those inspections help us see what's going on, assess whether they're being done correctly, if there are any lease stipulations, but just understand what's going on. And lens can be used to, but as a kind of a pre-inspection visit and a post-inspection visit, document what's happening. So the management challenges, it's been challenging to inspect entire sections, and especially when you get to very large properties, there are lots of parts of the property that aren't that accessible. The layered leases increase the complexity of lease management on these properties. There's increased pressure of public access. And it's also challenging to understand the new impacts that are coming from a changing climate and from extreme weather events. Most of these are not new, but some of these especially the complexity of managing layered leases and the pressure of public access. This is how new technology can actually help staff. So the Lens platform, I'm not going to be spending a lot of time on this, but I do want to hit this at a high level. It uses 72 sources of aerial imagery and geodatabases. And they do that through a combination of looking at free aerial data and a variety of satellite data, some at very high orbits and some at mid-elevation orbits. Some of those are updated just once a year and some as frequently as every 3 days. So there's a wide range of imagery that staff could be able to access. This would be also usable by multiple lines of business. Exhibit 2 in your board packet lists out different lines of business and how they could all apply this technology. And then there's these AI-assisted technology features. There's the standard dashboard that come as part of the package with the platform and lookout tools that evaluate land use factors over time and across regions. This would strengthen our lease and land property management with aerial monitoring and insights about ecological trends. And we could use these automatic change detection alerts that if things are happening on our property and we may not be necessarily going out for another year or 2 or 3, this alerts staff to maybe they need to take a look either by using the higher resolution data that comes at a slightly higher cost, or make an extra trip out there. And these are all ways that we can increase our monitoring. Some of these would it would reduce staff workload while improving oversight, but in some cases it would require an extra visit out there. We could also use it to create customizable monitoring reports to add as part of our reporting on lease management. And we could also use this information to showcase projects and our stewardship work versus interactive share links for public engagement and storytelling. So the basic feature is the Lens dashboard. There's numerous low resolution off-the-shelf data sets that's available. This enables staff to investigate and respond to previously undetected surface changes. We would basically upload the shapefile of all our surface lands and ask Lens to automatically check for land use changes. Many of these would be ones that we've authorized and approved, but others would possibly not be. We can also detect surface changes through lease stipulations. If we set timing and spatial limitations of when certain like oil and gas pads or mining operations or rights of way, we'd be able to check when those surface disturbing activities actually happened. So in the way to address how do we monitor whether these stipulations are being kind of implemented correctly. The basic dashboard is also very good for vegetation evaluation across time and regions. That little chart that I show you, that's just one example of data that's using that very generalized kind of vegetation evaluation. It can determine forage utilization, looks at the residual dry matter. It can help our district managers evaluate whether our properties are being properly grazed or managed. We can determine whether our properties are outliers compared to the region. Are they being managed as a whole better than the area around them, or just against other state trust land properties, or are they having really high forage utilization? And then also looking at flood, wildfire, and drought impacts. So this is all with their standard package, with being able to access a majority of those 72 different data layers. And then Lens Lookout has a feature that uses this AI-assisted change detection alerts. It involves all state trust lands at lower resolution and at-risk parcels or sites at higher resolution. If we're aware of properties that are at high risk for public trespass or use, such as our Loramore property, we can actually set that to be alerted at a much higher resolution for any change over time, and ask that we be updated at whatever time interval we want to be kind of updated on it. So we may, once we're made aware of a problem, we can actually prevent it from or be watching it much more closely. The lookout feature also enables us to identify, track, and investigate changes. This high resolution, the imagery is available for 3 to 9 cents an acre. Lens has said generally use about 6 cents an acre, but that enables us to investigate properties through a closer inspection. I think I'm going to have some problems with this anyway. The cost right now is $29,000 a year for the standard platform. And then for an additional $20,000, that's an estimate of what we might use at this higher resolution imagery. That would give us higher resolution, I think, about 180,000 acres for the first year. It would provide 20 user seats. It would give us 8 hours a year of custom training and deployment, and also 8 hours a year for engineering support and integration. And that would be integrating with our Atlas system as well as our GIS system. Appendix 3 3 on your packet also lists the kind of features that's the proposal from Lens. For different features, there's 2 basic sets that are available for government packages. And so really to close up, I just wanted to say this would increase our effectiveness. We'd be able to see more of our properties. We'd be able to know more before we go and identify sites where a closer look may be needed once we're out there. Again, for grazing management, we can estimate residual dry matter and forage utilization. It can identify irrigated areas. We're supposed to know about whether water coming off our property, off our surface lands are actually used on our surface lands. We'd be able to determine that. And again, we can identify outliers, good and bad, with our property management. And then we'd be able to increase our knowledge and understanding of our properties. I just given a couple of examples here. This picture shows conifer encroachment on a property up in Moffett County, where you see the pinyon juniper coming down onto the sagebrush. It's not good for greater sage-grouse habitat, but it also identifies a potential property where we could do a ecosystem service enhancement project on this. I spent a couple of days 2-3 years ago identifying all these properties across 250 properties of where opportunities they were for treatments like this. I would love to use Lens and just say, tell me where this is and how much acres it involves. Also, we can document changes to wetlands and riparian areas using the high resolution data, and we can even track the movement and growth and expansion and retreat of prairie dog colonies. Right now, we know where the habitat exists, but we don't have quantifications on a property by property basis. So these are all some specific examples, and again, more of those are listed in your exhibit 2, I think. So with that, I wanted to pause for a minute. If you, we also have a presentation by Miles Van Blarkum. He's available online, and he's going to run through kind of a little bit more specific information. I also left to him the opportunity to show you how he tracked the trespass and violation, the vehicles and the advance of that use on our Lorimer property. And then he actually can also just link in live to give you a live Lens demonstration. So with that, any quick questions before I move on?
The slide or 2 back, you mentioned tracking. Yeah, right there.
Oh, this
one, yeah, prairie dog colonies and
right.
And sage grouse habitat. Can you get sufficient resolution to monitor wildlife, or is it not sufficiently precise to actually do wildlife?
Actually, wildlife, like the animals, or just the habitat?
The animals, actual.
No, in fact.
I mean, ungulate herd's one thing, but a prairie dog is something else in terms of size, right?
Yeah, no. When I talk about prairie dogs, I'm talking about the colonies. You
So
can
you can see the disruption of the earth, but you can't see the discrete animal.
No, not a prairie dog. You can see though cattle and livestock, and so with the high resolution imagery, we've had some cases where we've had individuals trespass with their livestock on the property, and we'd be able to see. I don't know if we'd pick it up on an alert to have 10, 15, 20 cattle coming onto our property, but we could be checking for that.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, and so we'd be able to determine at what time we'd have to actually look and see what months they were on there.
Could you see, as an example, a beaver colony developing along a riparian area?
Yes, you can do that.
Okay.
Then I have a question, these things, and this is fabulous. I love how the breadth of the different data sets and also the difference in the losing the word. Anyway, the resolution.
Yeah.
My question is, these are time saving, but to take full advantage of this is going to add more time to at least 20 people with the seats. You're imagining district managers would be using it, stewardship staff, yourself. How do you think about this in terms of taking full advantage of the data available to us from a staff perspective, how, do we have the time and capacity?
That's a great question. And I think, you know, there's different there's different levels of interest among our line of business staff, right? About what kind of value will this give us? Oh, I can definitely use this for this XYZ. What I'm proposing, and I might describe in the cover sheet, is that to look at this for a 2-year period and really put it to a test. I don't know that 1 year would give us enough of that. What I foresee happening is certain lines of business, certainly the stewardship staff, kind of really putting it to, you know, pushing it to its limits. How can we really use this? And then letting the success stories follow from that, demonstrate how we can kind of use this. And that's kind of what I see happening. I think there's going to be, you know, everyone's different. Some people are early adapters, some people are not. I think the proof is in the pudding in terms of what, you know, what kind of outcomes we can detect. But I will say the return on investment, I know that Miles will talk a little bit about what it costs to do that analysis for the Lorimore property. And we've already spent, what, 190,000 just on one property with.
That is a perfect example.
Yeah, yeah. So, and you know, there's just so many parts of, you know, of the landscape that we can't see. Most of all of our district managers and resource specialists have ATVs. They get around, they see a lot of the property. That said, in the western part of the state, there's just areas you can't get to. All of the stewardship staff, we don't use an ATV. We're walking. And so there's just a lot of the property that we can't see. And I'm excited to kind of use this to help us learn more about the property in a way that, you know, we may know there's a drought, but what areas are mostly affected by the drought? How do our lands compare to others? Or are we doing well? So.
Thank you. I mean, and I'm a fan. I mean, I think this is fantastic. And a 2-year trial is no regrets, it seems to me, Nick.
I think it's an important point to bring back up is that staff, because of what's available through analytics and automation, staff isn't looking at hundreds of thousands of images. You're looking at an alert that says, hey, something changed here. And then they can go focus on it. And that's where the significant value comes from, because a lot of these data sets have been available for a long time.
Yeah.
But who had time to go spend their, you know, look through it all.
But also it seems like, you know, a question of like weed encroachment and diversity of forage and forage utilization, just those areas or people, the district managers have just a sense, or like you said, in a drought situation, how big of a drought discount are we talking about? Like, you know, it's only this part of their property, but the whole region is worse. I don't know. But yeah, I agree with you that the AI part, and that'll only get better.
And we can create a customizable report that, you know, every district manager can say, print this out for this section. I'm going to go out and look at it next week. You know, it'll give him some clues of what to look for, or is it just business as usual? Yeah, So with that, maybe I'd like to introduce Miles Van Blarcom. Miles, there you are. I think you're ready to drive in terms of if you want to share your screen. And
Great.
You can take it from here. Thanks.
Thank you, Mindy, and thank you to the commissioners and the director for having me today. I'm sorry that I couldn't be there in person. Can I just get confirmation that you can see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm excited to today introduce a little bit about our company and also our tool today, Lens. And so first, to introduce our company, we're a pretty small software company that is really exclusively focused on building software tools for conservation agencies and organizations. There's really no shortage of data out there in the world, but there's certainly a shortage of tools that are purpose-built for organizations like the State Land Board that are looking to really leverage those data sources for their decision making. You know, there's all sorts of platforms for defense, for insurance, for even roofing companies that many of those are actually leveraging these same data sets, but are using very different tools to come up with answers. And so our focus is to create conservation tools for conservation organizations. And what I'll be introducing today is Lens, which Mindy has already done a fantastic job of introducing, but it is a remote monitoring platform, which really at its core means a tool for answering questions, helping staff answer questions that previously might require a lot of windshield time or time out in the field to answer. And so some of the different types of questions that we're hoping that the State Land Board can use Lens to answer, and that our current customers are using Lens currently to answer, range from, understanding lease stipulations and compliance with those terms, understanding habitat questions, potentially observing and tracking encroachment issues or potential dumping issues, and especially in areas that are really difficult to access on a frequent basis on the ground. There's also quite a bit of questions that even in an ideal scenario where staff will be able to be out there in the ground, it might be really difficult to answer. So for instance, when exactly did this change that I'm looking at happen? Or how often is an area flooding? Or how often are these sorts of storm events or fires happening in this particular area? And there's a really just a wide range of questions that folks are using Lens to answer. And the State Land Board has such a uniquely wide purview of use cases that I think, in a way, it's a bit of a microcosm of our lots of different types of customers that range from the Forest Service to departments of agriculture to lots of land trusts across the state of Colorado. I myself spent the better part of my 20s actually driving around the state of Colorado doing conservation easement monitoring for Colorado open lands. And so for years, I was driving around and sleeping in just about every single county in Colorado and spent a tremendous amount of time doing that. And the impetus for me to start looking at remote monitoring was actually COVID, when we could no longer travel around the state. And so I was actually very reluctant, frankly, about the promise of remote monitoring and thought that it was, frankly, actually threatening a part of my job that I really enjoyed. But after really deploying Lens and using it for about 4 years as a customer, I really came to see how much time it saved me and how more purposefully it allowed me to spend my time when I was actually out there on the ground. And so I've been with our company for about 4 years since then. But Lens is used by the Nature Conservancy, Denver Water, Colorado State Forest Service, through the National Forest Service, and lots of different land trusts across the state. There's really a fantastic cohort of folks in the state that are using Lens. And so some of the different ways that I think Lens can provide value to the Colorado State Land Board, and this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but certainly some of the ones that come to mind, is there's all these different data sources out there. This is nothing new, but having them all in one place so that's really easy for staff to use to answer questions efficiently, that is something that is pretty novel and new with Lens. And so we're aggregating all these different sources into one place. And just by creating really thoughtful tools for staff to use, very easy to use, we're helping folks actually manually monitor thousands of acres in literally just minutes. I'll even share my screen in a little bit and we can take a live look at Lens together so you can see how that's done. And also, as I mentioned, we're also looking at things that are really hard to see even out there on the ground. So trend analysis, understanding, when exactly was this area disturbed, or how often does this area flood, et cetera. And then there's also that automated component. We're just recognizing that although our primary purpose is to create really intuitive and easy to use tools for staff to use, we recognize that they're often managing many more acres than they could possibly monitor. And so we're trying to think of ways that we can use automated alerts both on public data sets, but also on commercial high resolution imagery, which is our newest feature, to really leverage that. And so, as I mentioned, again, we're aggregating all these different images in one place, both public data sources from lots of different public satellite arrays, but also commercial sources as well. This is just a glimpse into some of those different resolutions and providers that we have, everything from 1.5 meter all the way down to 15 centimeter. I'll say that the reason that it's important to have such a wide array of vendors in one place is that in really rural areas, there's not great coverage with a lot of different imagery providers. And so if you're looking out in rural Colorado, it's best if you have access to a lot of different satellite companies so you can see who has the best coverage in that particular area. And it's really expensive and frankly difficult to have contracts with each of these different providers. And so Lens is kind of unique in that you're having that all in one place. And there's a ton of different ways that Lens can really provide value to the State Land Board. The one that I'm most excited about and would feel like the greatest success in hopefully our first couple of years of use would be to simply catch issues earlier before they become expensive to deal with and more importantly, are damaging to the environment. This is the number one way that I was really finding success at Colorado Open Lands, was determining earlier in the process when a conservation easement violation happened. Instead of that going on for years, becoming an expensive legal issue or a cleanup issue, how can we detect that sort of thing a lot earlier? And also how can we track cleanup? I've also mentioned that, and Mindy has as well, that On tab 5, page 393 of your packet, you'll also find an example of a report that includes some of these different findings kind of in a single report, but a good glimpse into what documenting an issue through Lens could look like. And then also looking at that analysis tool, which could be used for determining exact timing of when exactly an encroachment happened, or when a area of ATV damage occurred, or how often precipitation trends are happening in a particular area, et cetera. And so there's tons of different possibilities in this. And we can not only look at that at a single site, but also aggregate those sorts of trends across all state land board properties. So you could understand, for instance, the above ground carbon holdings of your entire land portfolio across, hundreds of thousands of millions of acres. We can also help you understand across all your rangeland properties the sorts of vegetation trends that might be useful for rangeland monitoring as well. Now hopping to some of those different automation tools that we mentioned. Our first is called Lens Lookout. This is something that we've actually been using machine learning, as we called it years ago, for many years. And this is using mostly public data sets that are derived from what we call index layers. So these are showing, essentially light that signals things like high vegetation vigor, or moisture presence, or potential charcoal from a fire. And so all these can be used to cover your entire state. This is using public imagery, so there's no sort of per acre variable cost to deploying these alerts across really large areas. And so this is helpful for us at Colorado Open Lands to understand any potential areas of encroachment. If there's a really egregious, ATV trail that starts to form across vegetation, that's something that would probably be detected by vegetation drop alerts. Also understanding effects from fire. I spent a lot of time using Lens and public imagery to delineate the many fires that happened that summer of 2020 and figure out exactly how many acres of our holdings were actually affected. Our other goal is to not only, deliver alerts to staff, but help them ultimately determine whether it's a legitimate alert or not. We don't want to be deploying staff out to the field just because they got a notification. We're trying to give them the tools that they need to really evaluate whether or not this is a concerning issue by being able to order small amounts of high resolution imagery to take a closer look at that particular area. For years, the issue with seeing things that don't appear in ecologic data is that there wasn't a way to explain to a computer that we want to look for an ATV or a RV or a car. In the past about 8 months, I'd say the large strides that have happened with AI has allowed us to roll out a new feature that essentially deploys AI to actually interpret high resolution imagery to see things that might not be visible in some of those public data sets that are low resolution. And so this is an example of a site where there's dumping. This is our Lens AI agent actually interpreting the imagery and making those sorts of observations. We've done quite a bit of ROI analysis, both on Lens, just using it manually from a staff perspective. The Nature Conservancy has actually published a white paper out of California that walks you through the ROI that they have received for deploying Lens via just manually monitoring with Lens. And they've had, about an 80% ROI. With the new agentic tool that we're rolling out right now, based on a Nature Conservancy's estimates, we're looking at probably a 3 to 7 net ROI, or about a 96% cost reduction from the way that they were previously monitoring easements entirely on the ground. Obviously, the State Land Board is not currently monitoring every single acre on the ground, and so those numbers would look a little bit different. But I think regardless of whether Lens is deployed using this agentic component or just by really being a cost-effective and easy-to-use tool for staff to deploy, I think you're going to see a really strong ROI here. And kind of on the one question that Mindy received around, how is this feasible to plop into people's lap as a resource? How can this be worth its time? That's something that we really think about with every organization where we roll out Lens. We work with everyone from the federal government to very small counties and all sorts of organizations in between. And so part of the adoption of Lens includes a lot of training from us to help you, have this be an intuitive, quick, and easy to use tool, as opposed to just another thing that's plopped into everyone's lap. Lens on the spectrum of geospatial tools is incredibly easy to use, and that's our main focus. We work with folks that never would have thought that they would be using a aerial imagery tool, and they don't have any sort of GIS experience. And so it's a very intuitive tool, and that really helps that instant, approachability from a staff usage perspective, so that they can really effectively use that right off the bat. I'd like to stop there and see if there's any questions before I do a really quick walkthrough of Lens Live.
I think you're good.
Great. So Lens is a web-based application, which you can see that I can access just by shifting over a tab here. So it works on any sort of computers that you're already using. So this is the Lorimor property that Mindy sent along to me. And so what this essentially looked like was I took that shapefile, uploaded it to Lens. That took a couple of minutes. And then as soon as I added this area into Lens, our system automatically processes all of the public images and all of the commercial images that have been captured for this particular site over the past 25 years or so. And so that takes just a couple of minutes, and then we're kind of ready for viewing here. And so what we're looking at right now is this is a public image from 2022. And then we can also compare this to a public image from 2023. And so this is kind of a classic Lens feature here. This is the slider bar. Very simple, but I monitored hundreds and hundreds of thousands of acres of Colorado doing this method. It's remarkably simple, yet very time effective. If we sat here for another 15 minutes, I bet we could crank through about 70,000 acres pretty quickly. It's an amazingly effective tool. And the way that we're essentially accessing imagery here is not only by viewing all these past public images, which again are going to go back to about 2005 or so, but also viewing a wide array of commercial images, which you can view here in this left-hand order pane. And so these are coming from, again, that pretty wide variety of different satellite images. So these are pulling from all the images that these companies have already captured. And so that allows you to access these images, preview them, and then purchase them on a cents per acre basis. And so for this pretty large property, a couple hundred acres, I can preview this image here. I can see the exact date, time that is captured. And I can see that to cover these, a couple hundred acres, that would be about $8 to order this entire image here. If I was really only curious about a particular part of this property, I could use our partial area tool to just select about 10 acres or more for a couple of cents. And that would give us hopefully enough information to kind of answer the question that we're after. One of the things that Mindy mentioned to me was that there's some potential issues on this property with encroachment and dumping. And so the first steps that I kind of took here was to simply move the slider bar back and forth. And so I could see, there wasn't a whole lot of change in the southern part of the property. I do see that it looks like there was a vehicle present right there. Looks like that disappeared about a year later. But as I moved my way north in this property, this is kind of where I saw some of the early signs of what seemed to become a pretty decent issue here. And so come on this north boundary here, you can see just kind of straddling this property boundary. And by the way, we always include bonus imagery surrounding your property so that you can see what the neighbors are up to in case there's an issue that kind of crosses that boundary. But I can see this issue developing here. And so, I ordered a couple more images here. And just knowing this potential area here, this has allowed me to really hone in on this particular area. So I was ordering images for only a couple of cents. And those images allowed us to kind of make more observations about exactly what we're seeing here. So in addition to seeing this sort of thing, staff can then document these sorts of findings. And so there's this living stewardship record across all the state land board properties where you can see past years of staff observations. And so each of these observations, I can go ahead and just click on it. And it'll actually take me to that individual image and area that staff person was referencing when they made that observation. And so this is actually looking at one of our higher resolution image sources in Lens. This gives you enough resolution to see not only the debris around this trailer, but the presence of this RV. Looks like a car there. This can be helpful for staff to kind of inventory exactly what they're looking at in terms of cleanup and what sort of resources need to be deployed on the ground. And so again, there's a pretty wide range of resolutions in Lens. And when I save these different observations here, I can easily create a monitoring report just by clicking this button. If I was to click that button right there, it would create the exact same PDF report that you're looking at in your board packet. And so really easy to not only make these observations, but also just document them. So there's a good paper trail, figuring out, when exactly this sort of issue was first noticed and how it's been progressing over the years. Any questions there so far?
Would have saved us a lot of money if we got onto that earlier.
That's the hope.
So if there are properties bars that are along, certain high use areas versus out in, faraway lands that we don't, that are unlikely to have encroachment like that.
What do you think about like in the state forest, whatever up there with all the RVs and the sand dunes that like making their way to illegal camping down here?
Yeah, and you can see at that resolution that, you could see cattle, you could even see sheep. We had a situation in the Southwest where there was so illegal sublease of someone bringing on a flock of sheep. That's something that you'd be able to pick that up, at this.
Yeah. Great. Any questions from anyone?
Is there anything you'd like us to look or like me to look at more between now and next month? Should I come back next month with a request? Or are you looking for more information?
No, we're.
Yeah, I'm ready. 2 years and.
Board packet. The board. Yes, yes.
Miles, what's the situation for long-term storage of purchased data? When we access it, it exists as part of your environment. And so does it make sense for us to try to then pull it into our environment? Because for all of us, storage is getting more expensive. Just curious, what's the expectation for accessing over the long haul?
That's a great question. So by default, all of your data, all your imagery, et cetera, will be entirely stored on our cloud services. And that being said, if there are images that you would want to either download, whenever possible, based on the legal restrictions of the vendor that you're purchasing them from that image is from, you can usually download those as a GeoTIFF file, which is full resolution and geo-referenced. And so in addition to viewing this sort of imagery in Lens, we can not only download this imagery, but we can also actually stream it, which would allow you to stream quite a bit of imagery into your GIS platform for cartography, navigational maps, public visuals, et cetera, without you actually having to store it yourself. If you wanted to store it yourself, then you could certainly download it as a GeoTIFF usually. But that's kind of how the imagery relationship works in a nutshell.
Oh, yes, Commissioner.
You may have touched on this, but I missed it, so I apologize. But are the suppliers of satellite imagery, is it a robust and competitive market, or is it dominated by few players?
That's a great question. In the past couple of years, it seems to be a little bit more competitive in that there has been new ways to launch satellites. There's also different types of satellites. So if we actually scroll way back here, let's go back to about 2015. You can see that in 2015, 2016, there's actually only a couple satellites that were even in orbit capturing images of this property. And every year since then, it's gotten a lot better. So Nearmap here, this is actually flown via aircraft. And so we're seeing more of these sorts of aircraft captures, which are great. This image we're looking at right now is actually flown via aircraft. If there's any drone imagery that you all already have, we could likely get that into Lens for you for kind of cross usage. But in these years since, you can see more and more of these satellites have gone into orbit. And so the good news is that it gets better every year. The prices, those continue to usually drop for imagery. We're also seeing more flexibility around ordering small pieces of imagery, which, if you were to go directly to one of these vendors, they would require you to purchase thousands of acres to hit their minimum spend limit, which would be probably about $20,000 for a single image. And so we essentially work as a buyer's club where we cover those sorts of spatial minimums for vendors so that our customers can access, 5-10 acre increments to answer those sorts of questions without them having to pay exorbitant amounts of money for that sort of imagery.
Yes.
One more. No doubt, this kind of surveillance falls in the category of the ultimate big brother. What extent have you encountered criticism or resistance? Perhaps from folks that still see black helicopters and believe the Earth is flat out there.
That's a great question.
What kind of cultural, political antagonism do you encounter to this kind of surveillance? And therefore, the agency could be. I mean, I can see. For the first time we put some imagery like this up in public view, which I guess is right now, it's a public meeting. We're gonna get a boatload of email from some of our constituents out there who, again, believe in black helicopters and that, et cetera.
Certainly. I mean, from personal experience, I remember my first stewardship season at Colorado Open Lands where I was announcing to our, hundreds of landowners that instead of being out there on the ground, we were going to be looking at aerial imagery of their property. And that obviously raised some eyebrows. What most of them then realized is that from a privacy perspective, they really appreciated that approach instead of us sending some random college intern out onto their property where they might, break their leg in a prairie dog hole. So that ended up kind of really being quite helpful. And frankly, people really enjoyed seeing aerial imagery of their properties. And so when working with private landowners, I would always share those images with them and say, look at the great conservation work that's happening on your property here. I think all these different image sources that we have in Lens, these are all publicly available. There's nothing here that's secret. For instance, if we go back to some of these images here, this is an image that's captured by U.S. Department of Agriculture. This is sufficient resolution to, see these RVs and vehicles here. But it's certainly not enough to, see what sort of hat somebody's wearing. There's federal requirements around satellite imagery resolution. So the highest resolution imagery that you could actually even order through Lens is this resolution right here. This is about a 30 centimeter image. And this is a federal regulation that this is the highest resolution that you can order. This actually does show you a nice post cleanup view of this particular area. So we can end that on a good note. But, the higher resolution image that we were looking at before, which is 15 centimeters here, this is actually flown via aircraft. So these are relatively limited in terms of the areas that they're flying over. You all in Colorado are kind of lucky in that there's certainly a lot more of this imagery captured in a state, especially in more populated areas of the state. But generally, for the same reason that you can't see a prairie dog, or I wouldn't use Lens to see, a coyote or anything like that. There's certainly a resolution limitation there that I don't foresee ever changing, and seems to be sufficient for the social contract with, there not being too much, visible with imagery.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner.
I would just also point out that we're only showing images of state trust land, right? And so the expectation of privacy, I think, is different for someone on state trust land. It in the same way that our staff is allowed to go on to property that is being leased and to examine the property, this is another form of that. So
to that point, Elliot, once we deploy this or begin using it, we should be transparent about it and inform lessees. Look, we're gonna use satellite imagery to monitor our property, period. So that they know that as going in.
Yeah,
I think that's great to do for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Mindy.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Miles.
Thank you, Miles.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, I think that wraps up our workshop. This has been a great workshop. I don't know about the rest of you, but I really enjoyed it. Before we wrap up, I have a question for Commissioner Heath and Commissioner Pribble.
On this barrier so I can see.
Yeah, would you take a look, even if you can't answer now?
I have everybody but Josie.
Oh, okay.
I'm gonna ask Josie.
Oh, wow, you've made the room. Okay. Josie, would you consider moving the June meeting from the second week to the third week?
Hold on, let me take a look at them.
That would indulge me in something I could not work around.
No, we had participation from the southern tip of Chile today.
Yeah, he's established a very high bar for.
Just monitor that. Just keep it.
Miles.
Transcontinental.
It would be, the meetings would be on the second full week.
No,
that second.
17th and 18th, June 17th for the workshop.
The 7th.
Meeting.
Looks like that, I can make that work.
And then maybe trip. Yay. Thank you. And so may it be.
It's a travel thing. So the dates would be
17, 18. And yeah, like it would likely have travel. Perfect. All right. Unless there's any other questions or comments or requests, let's consider this workshop wrapped. Thank you, everybody.
And thanks, especially I enjoyed the first hour and I appreciate your idea on that. And I think we've all suggested we probably do that again.
Terrific. Thanks, Emily, for implementing that.
Yeah. But I mean, would we be thinking of that, like just making an every month kickoff to a workshop?
Definitely more frequent.
I'll leave it to you all. Okay.